Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley, the place where stories linger long after the lights go out. Tonight, we prepared chilling tales paired with the soothing sound of rain to ignite your imagination and make your heart race. If you feel the cold creeping in, tap that like button. It helps keep the shadows alive. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from or share the scariest moment that sent shivers down your spine. Don't forget to subscribe. You wouldn't want to miss what lurks in the darkness ahead. The Sea Devil of Cape Cod. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet waters of Cape Cod. I stood on the dock, feeling the familiar creak of the wood beneath my boots, the scent of salt in the air. It was a place I had come to know well over the years, a place of peace in its own strange way. But tonight, something felt different. The breeze carried a cold edge, and the vast expanse of the water seemed endless, unyielding. Cape Cod had always been isolated, cut off from the rest of the world by miles of rugged shoreline. People came here for solitude, or maybe to escape the chaos of their lives, but I had come for a different reason: the sea. It was in my blood. My grandfather had been a fisherman, and I had followed in his footsteps, though I wasn't sure I was cut out for it. Still, there was something captivating about the water. Something that always drew me back. The houses along the coast were old, their weathered wood and rusted nails telling stories of years past. I was used to the sight, the sagging roofs, the peeling paint, but tonight, the familiar landscape looked different. Darker, almost like it was hiding something, as though the world had shifted just enough for me to notice. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though no one was around. The place was deserted, save for a few old fishermen lingering in the distance, their figures barely visible against the twilight sky. I knew the stories they whispered. Some of them spoke of things in the water, things that lived beneath the surface, hidden from sight. Tales of disappearances, of boats found empty, of fishermen vanishing without a trace. At first, I thought they were just rumors, local superstitions meant to keep the younger generation away from the water at night. But something tonight told me that there was more to those stories. A shiver ran down my spine as I glanced toward the darkening water. The waves were calm, almost unnaturally so, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. I pushed the uneasy feeling aside. I was here to fish, not to be haunted by old stories. But even as I turned toward my boat, the air seemed to grow colder, and the stillness around me felt heavier. It was as if the quiet itself was waiting for something. I couldn't explain it, but I knew that tonight, the sea would not be kind. I didn't know what I was expecting when I set out onto the water that evening, but it certainly wasn't the uneasy quiet that settled over me as I cast off. The boat glided slowly, the motor humming softly, but everything around me was still. The waves were barely more than a ripple, and the sky stretched endlessly above, painted with the soft hues of twilight. But there was a sharpness to the air now, something colder than it should have been for such a mild evening. As I drifted further from shore, the last vestiges of sunlight disappeared beneath the horizon, and the world seemed to shrink, becoming a tunnel of dark water and shadow. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders, a reflex to ward off the chill creeping through the air, though I couldn't quite shake the growing sense that I wasn't alone. The stories about the Sea Devil floated in the back of my mind, whispers from the old fishermen, but I laughed them off. My grandfather had always called them nonsense. "There's no monster in the sea," he'd say, "only fish, and the wind, and the endless stretch of water." Still, something felt off tonight. I cast my line into the water, the line cutting through the stillness with a soft plop. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating, and for a moment I considered turning back. but I dismissed it, blaming my unease on the isolation. The sound of the waves, the hum of the engine, it was all too familiar. There was nothing here to be afraid of. Then I saw it. At first, it was nothing more than a glimmer in the deep. Just the faintest reflection, something that shimmered beneath the surface. I leaned forward, squinting into the dark water, trying to make sense of it. My breath caught in my throat as I saw them, two faint, glowing orbs, barely visible at first, but slowly coming into focus. Eyes. Eyes that shone with an eerie, unnatural light. I froze. The eyes were just beneath the surface, too far to touch, but close enough to make my skin crawl. They weren't the eyes of any animal I recognized. They were large, too large, and they shimmered with an unearthly glow. I could feel the blood draining from my face, my heart thudding in my chest. My first instinct was to pull the line back, to retreat, but something held me there. The eyes didn't blink. They just stared, unblinking, as if they were waiting, watching, studying me. A strange, cold sensation washed over me, a gut-deep feeling of being haunted. But what haunted me? And why? The wind shifted, the air growing thicker, colder, and the eyes seemed to shift, moving ever so slightly beneath the water's surface, as if drawn closer to my boat. My breath caught again as the boat rocked slightly. No, not from the waves. It was something else. Something beneath me. I jerked my head around, expecting to see something in the water, some kind of massive shape, but there was nothing. Just the water, dark and still, stretching to the edge of the horizon. I couldn't look away from the eyes, though. They didn't move, but their glow grew stronger, as though they were pulling me in. I wanted to turn the boat around, to flee back to shore, but my body was frozen, gripped by an overwhelming sense of dread. What if I did? What would happen? The eyes blinked. It was so sudden, so unexpected, that I almost fell into the water. But before I could even gather my wits, the glow of those eyes dimmed, slipping back into the depths like a ghost retreating into the shadows. I waited for a moment, holding my breath, expecting them to return, but the water was still again. Too still. I wasn't sure if what I had just seen was real. Could it have been a trick of the light, some weird reflection off the water? But deep down, I knew better. I had seen them, those eyes. And they had seen me. My hands were trembling as I pulled the line back in, the knot in my stomach tightening. I should have turned around then. I should have gone back to shore. But something, a mix of fear and curiosity, kept me there, anchored in the darkness. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just the isolation getting to me. The ocean played tricks on people, didn't it? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had watched me from below wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was something real. Something waiting. The next morning, the air was thick with fog, the kind that clung to your skin and muffled the world around you. I stood at the dock, my hands wrapped around the warm rail as I watched the mist swirl over the water. It was a quiet morning, the kind that made you feel like the world had been swallowed up by the sea. And in that stillness, the unease from the night before settled deeper into my bones. I couldn't shake the image of those glowing eyes, their cold gaze etched into my mind like a brand. I wasn't alone at the dock. A group of the old fishermen were gathered in their usual spot, talking in low voices. They didn't notice me at first, and I didn't approach them immediately. I knew better than to interrupt their mornings. They weren't the friendliest sort, especially when they were busy preparing their boats. But as I watched, I caught snippets of their conversation. It was the usual talk of tides, catches, and bad weather. But then something changed. A pause in their words, a shift in the air. The topic turned to the water, to the deep sea. "You've been out there lately?" one of the men, a weathered old fisherman with a long, gray beard, asked another. His voice was low, cautious. The second man, a bit younger but still with the sea in his eyes, looked out at the fog with a furrowed brow. "I been out yesterday. Same as always, but there's something different out there now." The first man grunted, his eyes narrowing. "Something in the depths. Not like the sharks or the cod. This thing, it's been coming closer." A shiver ran down my spine, and I took a cautious step closer. I didn't want them to notice me, but I couldn't help but listen. They were talking about something I hadn't heard before, something darker than the usual sea creatures that haunted the waters around Cape Cod. "What do you mean, something different?" the younger man asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. The older man's face tightened, his gaze moving from the water to the others around him, as if making sure no one else was listening. "It's not something you can explain with words. People have seen it. They say it's like a shadow in the water, but bigger. Much bigger." I wasn't sure if it was the mist or the way the men's voices dropped into conspiratorial whispers, but it felt as if the fog itself was holding its breath. My heart started to race. I had heard these types of stories before, tales spun by old fishermen who had lived on the edge of superstition, but there was a weight to their words now, a hesitation that made the air feel thicker. "Last month, old Pete told me he saw it," the older fisherman continued, lowering his voice even more. "Said it had eyes like lanterns, glowing in the dark, just under the water. And it wasn't just looking at him. It was watching him, like it was waiting for him to make a move." The younger man shook his head, clearly uncomfortable. "Come on, Frank. That's the sea messing with your mind. You can't trust what you see out there. It's too easy for the fog to play tricks." Frank, the older fisherman, didn't reply immediately. His eyes flicked back to the water. "It wasn't no trick. You can feel it when it's out there. The water feels different, like the whole sea's holding something beneath it, waiting." He took a long drag from his cigarette, flicking the ash into the wind. "Don't matter if you believe it or not, it's there. It's real. And if you get too close, you might not come back." The younger man went silent, and for a long moment, no one spoke. The fog hung heavy between them, making the words feel all the more ominous. I could hear the dull thrum of my heart in my ears as I listened. I couldn't help it. I had to know more. I stepped forward, clearing my throat. "What is it?" I asked, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "What's out there in the water?" The men turned to look at me, their eyes narrowing in a mix of curiosity and caution. Frank gave a small grunt, a half-smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "You a fisherman, boy?" I nodded, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I've been out on the water before, but I've never heard anything like this." Frank's gaze shifted back to the fog, his expression becoming unreadable. "They call it the sea devil. Some say it's a creature older than the ocean itself, a thing that comes from the deep, from places we're not meant to know. Others say it's a god, a guardian of the sea. But no matter what you call it, it doesn't care much for people." The younger man looked at Frank, his eyes filled with doubt. "You really believe that old nonsense?" Frank didn't answer. Instead, he turned and spat into the water. "Doesn't matter what you believe. It's the sea, and the sea doesn't care what you think. Just know that it's there, lurking. And if you get too close, well, don't expect to come back. I stood there, staring at them, feeling the weight of their words settle around me. The sea devil. It sounded like the kind of thing meant to keep people away, to make them fear the water. But I had seen those glowing eyes the night before, and now, hearing the fishermen speak in hushed tones about it, I couldn't dismiss it so easily. As I turned to leave, I felt their eyes on me, the old men watching with a knowing look. "You'll learn soon enough," Frank called after me. "The sea has a way of teaching you things you don't want to know." I tried to shake off the unease crawling up my spine as I walked away. But deep down, I knew that whatever haunted the waters off Cape Cod wasn't just a myth. It was something real. Something that had been waiting, watching, beneath the surface. And it was only a matter of time before it came for me. I tried to shake off the feeling that had crept into my bones, that lingering sense that something was wrong. As I walked away from the dock, the words of the fishermen echoed in my mind, but I quickly dismissed them. They were just old men, set in their ways, clinging to the superstitions that had kept them going through decades of hard, lonely work. The sea was their life, their livelihood, but that didn't mean I had to buy into their stories. The sea devil. A creature from the depths. Guardians of the ocean, they called it. It sounded like the kind of tale you tell to scare off newcomers, to keep them from exploring the dangerous, unpredictable waters around Cape Cod. I chuckled to myself as I made my way back to my small cottage by the shore. The fog was starting to lift, but the morning still had that heavy, oppressive feel to it. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, but I was determined to push past it. I had bigger things to worry about than ghost stories and local myths. The water, I thought, wasn't going to be the thing that took me down. If anything, the danger of the sea was in the weather, the unpredictable tides, and the occasional storm. I've learned to respect those over the years, but there was nothing supernatural about them. Nothing supernatural about those glowing eyes I had seen the night before either. I laughed again, but this time it felt a little hollow. There was no creature lurking beneath the waves. No glowing eyes waiting to drag me down to the depths. I'd seen enough in my life to know better than to give in to fear. It was probably some trick of the light, some reflection, or maybe the tired mind playing games on me in the isolation of the water. It wasn't the first time I'd been caught up in a moment of unease after too much time alone. That was all it was, my mind running wild, nothing more. I spent the rest of the morning repairing the boat, tightening the lines and checking the engine. There was something soothing about the work, something grounding. It was simple, routine. It made the world feel a little more predictable, a little less strange. But even as I worked, my thoughts kept returning to the water, to those eyes. I tried to push the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand, but every now and then, the image would flash in my mind, unbidden and vivid. A trick of the light, I told myself. Nothing more. Later that afternoon, I met up with a few other fishermen in town. The small diner near the dock had a handful of regulars, each of them nursing a cup of coffee and gossiping about the weather and the state of the catch. I sat at the counter, ordering a sandwich, and tried to push the eerie thoughts from the night before out of my mind. "Did you hear the latest about Pete?" one of the men asked, his voice muffled by a mouthful of food. "Said he saw the sea devil again, out on the water. His boat was almost overturned." The others around the counter chuckled, their voices tinged with amusement, but I could tell it was more of a weary sort of laughter than genuine disbelief. These weren't men who truly believed in monsters. They knew the sea, its dangers, and they had all learned to deal with the unknown in their own way. Pete's always got some new story, another man added, shaking his head. Last month, it was ghost ships. Before that, he was swearing he'd seen a whale the size of a house. I'd take whatever he says with a grain of salt. The group laughed again, and the mood lightened. I couldn't help but join in, letting the weight of my unease fade just a little. I had my own doubts, sure, but I wasn't going to let those old tales get to me. The sea devil? The glowing eyes? That was just superstition, nothing more. I had more important things to worry about, like the tides and the weather. Those were the real dangers. I finished my sandwich and stood up, tossing a few bills onto the counter. You guys are all full of stories, I said with a grin. But the only thing I'm afraid of out there is a storm. The others nodded, each of them offering a smile or a grunt of agreement. It was the kind of talk I had expected. The kind of talk that made you feel safe, like you were in control. As I walked out of the diner and back toward my boat, I tried to push the thought of those eyes from my mind for good. The sea devil was nothing but a local legend. A myth to scare the younger fishermen and keep them from venturing too far out into the unknown. I wasn't going to fall for it. I wasn't going to let fear rule me. But deep down, somewhere beneath my confident exterior, there was a lingering doubt. What if I was wrong? What if the sea had its own secrets, things we were never meant to know? That night, the fog rolled in heavier than I'd seen it in a long time. It was thick, almost like a blanket, shrouding everything beyond a few feet in front of me. I could hear the occasional creak of the old pier, the gentle lapping of the water against the boat's hull, but other than that, the world felt strangely silent. It was the kind of night that made you feel like you were the only person left on Earth, as if the rest of the world had disappeared into the mist. I had gone out to check the boat one last time before bed, making sure everything was secured. The air was cold, but not freezing, and the salt water had a sharp tang to it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something that went beyond just the strange conversations I'd overheard or the unsettling image of those glowing eyes. As I moved along the dock, my boots echoing softly on the planks, I noticed something odd, a faint ripple in the water. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it caught my attention. I stopped and peered into the mist, straining my eyes. The water was still, except for the faint movement, like something large had disturbed it beneath the surface. I felt my breath catch in my throat. There it was again, a ripple, this time larger. A shape was moving just beneath the surface, slow and deliberate, like something was gliding through the water just out of sight. I took a cautious step forward, my heart starting to beat faster, the unease from earlier returning with a vengeance. I forced myself to dismiss it. It was probably just a fish or some other sea creature, but the way the water seemed to move with purpose, like something was stalking through it, made my pulse quicken. Then, I saw it. Just barely, but unmistakable. Two glowing eyes, faintly visible beneath the surface, hovering just below the waterline. The sight of them made my blood run cold. They were nothing like I'd ever seen before, glowing with a sickly, almost unnatural light. They didn't move like an animal's eyes, darting about nervously or blinking. They were fixed, unblinking, watching me. I stumbled back, my breath shallow and panicked, heart racing in my chest. For a long moment, all I could do was stare at those eyes, frozen in place. They seemed to be getting closer, the shape beneath the water shifting ever so slightly as if the creature was slowly moving toward me. I didn't know what I expected, but I certainly didn't expect what happened next. The water around the boat rippled violently, as if something had just surged toward the surface with a violent force. My instinct screamed at me to run, to get away from the dock, but my feet felt as if they were glued to the planks. The shadows in the water grew darker, the glowing eyes dimming just enough to make them appear like twin lanterns, beckoning me closer. Suddenly, the water erupted with a loud splashing noise, the surface breaking apart like something was trying to push through. I could feel the thrum of something powerful beneath, a presence pressing against the very fabric of the water. It wasn't the sound of a fish or a whale, it was something deliberate, something with purpose. My pulse was thundering in my ears now. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving the water. The splashing continued for a few seconds, then abruptly stopped. The eerie stillness returned, even as the adrenaline in my veins kept me tense, every muscle on edge. I didn't dare move for a few moments, unsure if whatever had been there was still watching. But the quiet stretched on, and nothing surfaced. The glow from the eyes was gone, swallowed up by the darkness of the night. I turned and ran back to the small cottage as fast as I could. I barely even registered the sound of my boots hitting the ground, my mind too full of that horrifying image of the eyes watching me from beneath the water. My breath came in ragged gasps, and by the time I reached the front door, I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, leaning against it for a moment, trying to steady my breath. The fog outside seemed to press against the windows like a living thing, suffocating the world outside. I stood there, staring out into the mist, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But there was nothing. The silence was deafening. I tried to convince myself it had just been my mind playing tricks, that there was a logical explanation for what I had seen, some natural phenomenon, maybe a reflection from the water. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Something was out there. Something real. And whatever it was getting closer. I took a long, shuddering breath and turned away from the door. I could feel the tension in the air, as if the very walls of the cottage were closing in on me. I had to leave. I had to get away from this place before whatever was lurking in the water decided to come for me next. But even as I thought that, I knew it wasn't just the sea I needed to fear. It was what was in the sea, waiting for me to make a mistake. Waiting for me to come too close. The following days passed in a blur, the fog a constant companion, thick and oppressive. I spent most of my time on the water, trying to push the unsettling events of that night out of my mind, but it wasn't easy. Each time I ventured out, I could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on me, and the sea no longer seemed like a friend I knew so well. It was one of those long, quiet nights on the water that started it. The kind where the moon barely pierced the clouds, leaving the world blanketed in darkness. I had set out for an evening catch, hoping the solitude would help clear my mind, the gentle rock of the boat soothing my nerves. The only sound was the soft slap of the water against the hull, the occasional creak of the boat as it cut through the waves. It was peaceful, at first. But then came the first odd noise. At first, I thought it was the wind, a strange draft carrying through the air. It was an unnatural sound, like a low, groaning whistle, barely audible over the sounds of the sea. I turned my head, scanning the dark horizon, but saw nothing. The night was thick with mist, and the water stretched endlessly in every direction. I shook my head, trying to shake off the feeling. I'd been out on the water 1,000 times, and I knew the way the wind could play tricks on your mind, especially when you were out alone. Maybe it was just that, a draft swirling through the rigging. It wasn't anything to be concerned about. But then I heard it again. This time, it was clearer. Not a whistle, but something like a low, distant moan, a groan that seemed to vibrate in the air around me. It wasn't the sound of wind, nor was it the typical. creak of wood on water. It sounded wrong. It was as though the sound itself was coming from the depths, from something far beneath the surface. I froze, my hand gripping the edge of the boat, my pulse quickening. The air around me seemed to change, thickening, pressing in, as if the very ocean itself was holding its breath. The sound was muffled, but unmistakable, like something ancient and deep calling from the darkness. The boat rocked gently, almost imperceptibly, but the sensation was enough to make me glance down at the water. The surface was still, eerily so. No ripples, no movement. Just a black expanse stretching out beneath me, hiding whatever it was that lurked in the depths. Another noise came then, closer this time. It was like something heavy was dragging along the ocean floor, a slow, grinding sound that made my skin crawl. My throat tightened, and my mind raced to make sense of it. It was impossible to tell where the sound was coming from, but it seemed to be circling me, following me, as though whatever was making it was moving just below the water's surface, keeping pace with my boat. I quickly scanned the water again, my breath coming faster. Nothing. Just the dark void beneath me. The sound seemed to be echoing from every direction, growing louder until it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. I gripped the oars, my knuckles white with tension. My heart pounded in my chest, the noise echoing in the silence. It didn't make sense. The water was too still, too quiet, for there to be anything moving beneath it. Yet, here I was, hearing something that didn't belong. The boat groaned, and I felt a sudden shift in the air, like the pressure had changed. I leaned over the side, straining my ears to listen. There it was again, a low, rumbling hum that vibrated in my bones. I pulled back quickly, my mind racing. It was impossible. It was just a trick of the night, just my imagination running wild. The fisherman's warnings had gotten to me. They had to have. But then the noise came again, unmistakable now, a guttural thud that sent a chill through me. It wasn't just the water. It was something in the water. Something huge. I jerked my head up, looking frantically across the water, but the mist had thickened, and there was nothing to see. The ripples that had appeared around the boat were gone. The sea had gone still again. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. My instincts screamed at me to row back to shore, but I didn't. I couldn't bring myself to move. There was something in the air now, something that held me captive, the feeling that I was not alone out there. The noises, the strange hum, had stopped, but the weight of silence felt heavier than ever. I could almost hear my heartbeat thudding in my chest. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, caught between the pull of the water and the urge to flee. But the fear was growing, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I couldn't stay here much longer, not with the sounds still fresh in my mind, not with that gnawing feeling that something dark, was waiting beneath me. I gripped the oars tightly, and slowly, cautiously, I began to row back toward the shore. The night air seemed even colder now, and every splash of the oars felt too loud, as if the sound would draw the creature from the depths. The glow from the distant lights of the harbor seemed miles away, but I didn't look back until I was safely anchored by the dock. The night was still, but now it felt different. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt like the calm before the storm, the heavy quiet that only precedes something terrible. I quickly tied the boat, my hands shaking, my mind running in circles. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me from the water, that I hadn't just heard strange sounds, I had been warned. And I wasn't sure I was ready to find out what had been calling from the depths. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one blurring into the next, thick with the weight of the strange occurrences I couldn't shake. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was just imagining things, that the isolation and constant fog were playing tricks on me. But no matter how much I tried to reason with myself, a growing dread gnawed at the edges of my mind. I began noticing odd things that I couldn't explain, small, insignificant at first, but unsettling all the same. It started one morning when I woke up to find my fishing gear scattered across the dock. I distinctly remembered packing everything up the night before, securing it neatly for the day's work. Yet there they were, the nets, the hooks, the bait, all tossed around as if someone had been rifling through them. I checked my cottage, but the door had been locked, and there was no sign of anyone else nearby. I couldn't explain it, but the unease settled in like a heavy cloud, and no matter how hard I tried to shake the thought, I couldn't ignore it. Something was out there, and I was alone with it. Later that afternoon, I was sitting at the edge of the dock, lost in thought, when I heard it again, the strange, muffled groaning sound from the water. It was subtle, but unmistakable. I shot up from my seat, my heart racing in my chest. But this time, I was prepared. There were no ripples in the water, no disturbance at all. Only that low, ominous sound stretching out across the stillness of the harbor. I could hear it growing louder, like a distant growl or rumble beneath the surface, a warning of something massive moving in the depths. I hesitated, staring at the water, my mind screaming for me to retreat, to get away from the dock, but my body refused to move. Instead, I stood there, rooted to the spot, as the noise built in intensity, until it seemed to vibrate through the very air itself. Then, just as abruptly, it stopped. Silence fell, unnerving in its suddenness. It was then that I began to question myself. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe it was the isolation, or the fog that never seemed to lift. The strange sound, the eerily calm water, the inexplicable noises, it all felt like something out of a nightmare. That night, I decided to confront it. I had to prove to myself that I wasn't going mad. I couldn't keep avoiding the water, the source of all my unease. I would go out again, get some distance from the shore, and see if there was any logical explanation for the sounds I heard. I pushed off from the dock, the boat rocking gently under my feet, the air thick with the fog. The only sound was the soft lapping of the water against the hull. I didn't expect anything to happen immediately. After all, it had been a few days since the last strange event. But as I drifted farther from shore, I started to feel a change in the air, an unsettling chill that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was the creak of the boat, but no, it was the same sound I had heard the night I'd seen the eyes beneath the water. The low, groaning rumble, distant yet unmistakable. My heart hammered in my chest. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the water moving, the shifting currents. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, the sound persisted, growing louder, coming from every direction. The water began to churn. It wasn't a storm, it wasn't even a breeze. There was no logical reason for it. The boat rocked violently, as if something large and heavy had just brushed against the hull. I grabbed the oars, my mind racing, but before I could move, something even stranger happened. The fog seemed to thicken around me. It wasn't just the mist rolling in, but something more sinister, something that moved with purpose, closing in around the boat like a living entity. I could barely see the bow of the boat, let alone the shoreline, and the silence, the same heavy silence that had plagued me before, returned, only this time it felt suffocating, pressing in on me. In the eerie quiet, the water began to ripple in waves, slowly at first, then faster, more erratic. I leaned over the side of the boat, staring into the water, but it was impossible to see through the dense fog. The sound, the groaning, the distant rumbling, was louder now, almost deafening, as if the water itself were alive, breathing beneath the surface. Suddenly, the boat jolted violently, throwing me off balance. I caught myself just in time, my hands gripping the sides of the boat, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I looked down into the water, heart pounding in my chest, but there was nothing there. No shadow, no shape. Just the dark, swirling depths, moving with unnatural force. I didn't know what to think anymore. The noises had been one thing, but this was something entirely different. I was alone out here. There were no other boats, no fishermen, just me in the water. And whatever was down there, in the depths, was toying with me. The fog grew thicker, and the water grew colder. The sounds, the ripples, the unnatural stillness, it was all too much. I began to row back toward shore, my hands shaking, my mind racing, but no matter how hard I rowed, the shoreline seemed as far away as ever. It was as though the fog was pushing me back, keeping me out there. When I finally reached the dock, I tied the boat with trembling hands, my legs unsteady as I stepped onto the planks. I wanted to shake it off, to tell myself it was just the fog, just my nerves getting the better of me. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I could feel it, in my gut, the presence beneath the water, watching me, waiting. I made my way back to the cottage, but the strange sensations lingered. The noises, the shifting water, the thick fog that seemed to have no end, they all wrapped around me, pulling at my sanity. I was starting to wonder if the people in town had been right all along. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind or if something truly unnatural was at work here. Either way, I couldn't escape it. Whatever it wasn't going away. The fog was thicker than usual the morning of the fishing trip. It clung to the surface of the water like a heavy blanket, curling and swirling as if it had a mind of its own. But I wasn't going to let it stop me. I had a job to do, and if I wanted to keep my mind from unraveling, I needed to get back to the water, back to some semblance of normalcy. I met up with a local fisherman, Henry, an older man whose withered face seemed carved from the sea itself. He'd been fishing these waters for longer than I'd been alive, and I figured his knowledge would be invaluable. We head out together, 2 boats, side by side, and see if we could bring in a good catch before the storm clouded everything. The boat was small but sturdy, a typical Cape Cod fishing vessel, with faded wood and nets draped over the sides. Henry's boat was similar, creaking softly as we set off from the dock. The fog was dense now, thickening with each passing minute until it felt like we were floating in some kind of dream. "Don't let the fog fool you," Henry muttered, his voice gravelly as he steered his boat ahead of mine. "It's the kind that brings strange things with it." I nodded, pretending I didn't hear the unease in his voice, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. I glanced around, but all I could see was mist, swirling in every direction. The water felt heavy, oppressive, and it didn't help that the eerie quiet seemed to press in on me from all sides. We spent the next few hours drifting, casting our lines into the water, but the catch was sparse. The only sound that punctuated the stillness was the occasional splashing of a line breaking the surface. Even Henry, usually so talkative, was quiet. I could tell he wasn't happy with how things were going, though he said nothing about it. At one point, Henry looked over at me, his brow furrowed. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned, scanning the fog-choked horizon. "Hear what?" Henry didn't respond right away. He simply stared out into the thickening mist. The only sounds were the creaking of the boats and the lapping of water against the hulls. Then I heard it. A low, rumbling sound, like something massive, something alive, moving beneath the surface. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer, reverberating through the water, sending chills down my spine. My pulse quickened, and I suddenly felt exposed, like we were being watched by something waiting just out of sight. "What the hell is that?" I muttered, my hand instinctively gripping the side of the boat. Henry didn't answer. He simply began to pull in his lines, his movements slow, deliberate. His face had gone pale, and I could see a glint of something darker in his eyes. "Get your lines," he barked, his voice tight with fear. "We're leaving." I didn't argue. Something in his tone told me that whatever it wasn't something we could face. I pulled my line in quickly, my fingers fumbling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, moving beneath the water, something much larger than a fish. As I got my gear together, I glanced over at Henry's boat. He was already untying his line, but his boat had begun to rock violently. The water around it seemed to ripple in unnatural ways, as if something massive were just below the surface. Henry's boat shuddered again, and I saw him flinch as if he had been struck. And then, without warning, his boat lurched. The rocking became more violent, and I saw Henry scramble to grab the side of the boat, his face contorted in panic. The rumbling beneath the water was now a growl, deep and menacing, like the sound of an ancient beast waking from a long slumber. I started to shout, to call out to him, but the words caught in my throat. The water around his boat churned violently, waves rising up from nowhere. Henry's boat tilted dangerously, and for a moment I thought it might capsize. But it wasn't the rocking that got my attention, it was the shape that appeared beneath the water. I saw it, a dark, enormous shadow moving swiftly beneath the surface. It was impossible to make out its form entirely, but I could see the undulating motion of something massive, something with an unnatural speed, something that didn't belong. Then, with a sickening lurch, Henry's boat was gone. I watched in horror as his boat disappeared into the water, swallowed whole by the churning depths. For a moment, everything was still. The rumbling stopped. The fog thickened even more, closing in like a shroud. I was alone now, utterly alone, with nothing but the empty expanse of water around me. I screamed, shouting Henry's name over and over, hoping for some sign, some response. But there was nothing. The water remained still, the silence thick and suffocating. I sat there in the boat, trembling, staring at the spot where Henry's boat had been just moments before. What had happened? Where was he? Had he fallen into the water? Was he? I couldn't finish the thought. I was frozen, my mind racing with possibilities I couldn't understand, couldn't make sense of. I was afraid to move, afraid to row back to the shore. The fog felt alive, pressing in from all sides, as if it were watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The rumbling noise had stopped, but something worse had taken its place, a deep, hollow silence, like the ocean itself was holding its breath. I rowed back, slowly, cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the dock, I couldn't shake the image of Henry's boat vanishing into the water. The fog had swallowed him whole, and I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. And as I docked, as I stepped onto solid ground, one thought kept repeating in my head: whatever it was beneath the water, whatever had taken Henry's boat, was still out there, waiting. And I was next. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Even as I tried to tell myself it was just the aftermath of a close call, a fleeting bit of fear left over from the encounter on the water, I knew deep down it wasn't that simple. Something had happened that day, something I couldn't explain, couldn't even begin to make sense of, and now it was with me. The fear, the unease, the thought that the creature, whatever it was, wasn't gone. I couldn't sleep. Each night, as the fog rolled in like clockwork, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing the faintest sound of water splashing, the creaking of a boat that wasn't there. I'd drift off for moments at a time, only to snap awake to the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my chest. It wasn't just the water. It was everywhere. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little too far. Every creak in the walls felt a little too deliberate. Every time I stepped outside, I looked out toward the water, expecting to see the massive, glowing eyes of the creature staring back at me from beneath the surface. The fog felt like a living thing, suffocating me, closing in on me, always creeping closer. And then there were the whispers. Low, indistinct voices that seemed to come from all around me. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it didn't feel like wind. It felt deliberate. It felt like the voices were calling my name, beckoning me, leading me somewhere I didn't want to go. I could feel the change inside me. My mind was unraveling slowly, each day more difficult to get through than the last. I started hearing things I couldn't explain. The faintest rustle outside my window. The slapping of something heavy against the dock at night. The sound of something swimming beneath the surface, even when I knew I was alone. I tried to dismiss it all, tried to convince myself it was just the isolation, the stress of what happened to Henry. But then, the dreams started. In the dreams, the creature would rise from the water, its glowing eyes like twin orbs of fire, staring into my soul. It would drag me beneath the surface, its tentacles wrapping around me, squeezing the life out of me, pulling me deeper and deeper into the cold, dark depths. And every time, just before I woke, I would hear its voice, a low, guttural growl that made the air in my room feel thick with dread. I found myself unable to go anywhere near the docks. The idea of stepping foot on a boat again sent waves of nausea through my stomach. I knew the creature was still there, waiting, patient. I could feel its presence, like a pressure pressing down on me, suffocating me. It wasn't just in the water anymore, it was inside my head. The fear had settled into my bones, into my very thoughts. I went to the local tavern one evening, hoping to get a drink and clear my head. The old fishermen sat around the table, talking in hushed voices, glancing at me whenever I entered. They'd seen it in my eyes, the fear, the unease, and I could tell they were talking about me when they thought I wasn't listening. Their eyes would flicker nervously, and then they'd fall silent whenever I got too close. One of them, a man named Gus, spoke up after a long silence. He looked at me, his weathered face unreadable. "You've been hearing it, too, haven't you?" I tried to act casual, taking a seat across from him. "Hearing what?" "The rumbling," Gus said, lowering his voice, glancing around. "The growl. It's getting louder, isn't it? You've been on the water, so you know it's not just the wind. It's something in the depths, something that wants us to know it's there." I nodded, my stomach tightening. I hadn't told anyone about the strange growl, the noise that had haunted me since that day. "How did he know?" "Some say it's just the sea," Gus continued, his voice barely a whisper now. "Others, well, they don't talk about it much. But you can feel it, can't you? That thing. It's awake. And it's hungry." The others in the tavern murmured in agreement, their faces tight with fear. I wanted to deny it, wanted to convince myself it was all just superstition. But I couldn't. The fear had already taken root in me, and no matter how hard I tried, it was impossible to shake it off. I found myself returning to the water again and again, even though every part of me screamed not to. There was something about the vast, empty expanse that drew me back, something that kept me coming closer to the edge. I couldn't explain it. But every time I stepped out onto the dock, every time I looked out into the fog, I felt its presence more strongly. It was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. I began to see things out of the corner of my eye, dark, flickering shapes moving in the water, just out of reach. I would jump, startled, but when I turned to look, there was nothing. The water would be calm again, just a faint ripple where I thought I'd seen something. But I knew it was there. Watching. Waiting. It was only a matter of time before it would come for me, just like it had taken Henry. I could feel the inevitability of it, the cold certainty that I wouldn't escape whatever it was that haunted these waters. And the worst part was, I didn't know if I was imagining it anymore, or if it had truly found its way into my soul. The day after the unsettling conversation at the tavern, I could hardly shake the feeling that something was coming, something far worse than what I had already experienced. The fog had rolled in thicker than ever, casting everything around me in a gray, oppressive haze. I couldn't bring myself to ignore it any longer. The fear had taken root, and it had made me desperate for answers, for something that might explain the terror that seemed to be stalking me. I found myself walking down to the docks again, almost against my will. The place that once felt like a second home now seemed cursed, each creak of the boards underfoot sounding like an ominous warning. But it was here, at the water's edge, that I knew I could find someone who might know more about what had been haunting me, and about Henry, who had vanished without a trace. I saw him before I even reached the end of the pier, an old fisherman named Earl, a quiet man who had lived here for as long as anyone could remember. His weather-beaten face was like a map of the ocean itself, each wrinkle telling a story of years spent battling the sea. He stood by his boat, untangling a line, the thick fog swirling around him like it was trying to swallow him whole. I approached cautiously, not sure how to begin. The words had been circling in my mind for days, but now that I was here, they seemed to catch in my throat. "Earl," I finally said, my voice coming out more strained than I had intended. "I need to know something. I need to know what happened to Henry." Earl looked up at me, his eyes unreadable beneath the rim of his worn hat. He said nothing at first, just stared at me, as if weighing something heavy in his mind. Then, with a slow sigh, he motioned for me to sit beside him. "Henry was a good man," Earl muttered, his voice rough like gravel. "He didn't deserve what happened to him. But then again, no one does when the sea devil comes calling." The words hit me like a slap to the face. "The sea devil?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean?" Earl's hands paused in their work. He stared out at the water, his expression distant, haunted. "The sea devil is no myth, son. It's a thing that's been here longer than any of us. The stories go way back, before the first settlers came to these shores. They said it was a creature of the depths, something that had lived beneath the sea for as long as the earth itself." I listened intently, heart pounding in my chest, as Earl continued. "They say it's got eyes that glow like fire, and that it can call to you from the water. If you hear it, it's already too late. It can lure you out on the boat, make you think you're seeing things, hearing things. It whispers your name from the depths, and before you know it, you're in its grip." I tried to shake the image of glowing eyes from my mind, but I couldn't. Earl went on. "It's not like any creature we know. Some say it's part man, part beast. Others say it's something that was here long before we ever set foot on this land. But the one thing all the old-timers agree on is that it's got hunger. And it doesn't stop until it's had its fill. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. What does it want? I asked, barely able to speak the words. Earl looked me square in the eye, his face grim. It wants to take you. It takes the strongest of us, the ones who go out too far, who think they're invincible. It pulls them down into the depths, drags them under, and doesn't let go. And once it has you, it doesn't let you come back. My stomach twisted. I could hardly breathe, the air suddenly feeling thick, suffocating. So Henry, he's gone? Earl nodded slowly, the weight of the truth settling between us like a stone. It was the sea devil that took him. He went out on the water just like you did, thinking he could handle it. But you can't fight something like that. You can't outrun it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had heard the rumbling, felt the presence, and still, I had dismissed it as some kind of mind trick. I had underestimated whatever force was lurking beneath the surface, something that wasn't content with just scaring people, it wanted to consume them, body and soul. Earl shifted, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. The worst part? The sea devil doesn't just take your body. It takes your mind, too. It twists you, drives you mad before it finishes the job. It makes you think you're seeing things, hearing things. But that's just part of it, the thing that scares me the most, the thing I can't explain. He paused, his gaze locking with mine, the fear in his eyes unmistakable. They say it can follow you. That even when you leave the water, when you go back to land, it's still with you. Watching. Waiting. My throat went dry as the weight of his words sank in. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't outrun the creature lurking in the depths of the ocean, no matter how far I went. It was always there, waiting for the right moment to pull me under, to take me just like it had taken Henry. You won't escape it, Earl muttered, as though reading my thoughts. Not unless you stop running. But even then, I don't know if you can fight it. No one ever has. The fog rolled in even thicker, cloaking the dock in a dense, suffocating mist. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise, my skin prickling as if something unseen was moving through the air. I stood up quickly, my heart hammering in my chest. Thank you, I said, the words coming out sharp and frantic. I need to think. I turned to leave, but before I could step away, Earl's voice stopped me. Remember this, he called out, his voice grave. You might think you're safe for now, but it's always watching. Always waiting. And when it comes for you, there's no escape. I turned back to him, but he was already looking at the water again, his weathered face set in grim resignation. I couldn't tell if he was speaking from experience or from fear. Either way, the truth was clear. I wasn't safe. The sea devil was real, and it would come for me sooner or later. And I had no idea how to stop it. The weight of Earl's words settled into my bones, an invisible force that tugged at my every step, pulling me deeper into something I wasn't sure I could escape. The sea devil wasn't just a myth, and it wasn't just lurking beneath the water. It was waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for me to give in to my fear. And I couldn't live like that. I couldn't just hide in the shadows of my own mind, terrified of something I didn't understand. The decision was made on instinct, a gut feeling I couldn't explain. I needed to see it for myself. If I was going to survive this, I had to face the creature head on. I couldn't keep running, pretending that the strange noises, the glowing eyes, the sense of being watched were just figments of my imagination. They were real, and I had to know why. The next morning, I gathered my gear and set out alone. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, didn't see the point. I didn't want to hear more warnings, didn't want anyone talking me out of it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't really have a choice. This wasn't about fishing anymore. This was about survival. This was about answers. I left the dock early, before the sun had fully risen, when the world was still draped in the cool quiet of dawn. The fog clung to the shore like a shroud, but I didn't care. I had seen enough of it to know what it felt like to be swallowed by the mist, and I was already past that point. There was no turning back now. As I pushed out into the water, the boat cutting through the glassy surface, I kept my eyes peeled for any signs of the creature. The sea was eerily calm, the kind of calm that only deepened my unease. I couldn't shake the image of those glowing eyes from my mind, the thought that they could appear at any moment, rising from the depths like some forgotten god, ready to claim me as its next victim. The further I went, the more I could feel the pull of the water beneath me, its cold, endless expanse, reaching up from the abyss. It seemed to stretch on forever, an infinite, silent void that held secrets far darker than anything I could comprehend. I tried to reassure myself that this was just a natural part of the ocean, that the fear I felt was irrational. But each wave that broke against the boat seemed to carry with it a whisper, a sound that was just out of reach, like a voice calling from below. As I ventured deeper, a fog settled over the water, thickening, suffocating, until I could barely see the shoreline. It was just me and the sea now. The silence was oppressive, like the world had forgotten me, leaving me alone in the middle of a great, empty space. I didn't know how long I had been out there. Time seemed to lose all meaning on the water. But then, as if summoned by my thoughts, I saw it. At first, it was just a glimmer, a faint, pulsing light beneath the surface. It wasn't much, but it was enough. My heart skipped a beat as I stared down at the water, my pulse quickening. The glow was faint at first, almost like a trick of the light, but then it grew brighter, sharper, impossibly so. There was something moving down there, something that didn't belong to the world above the surface. I could feel it in my chest, a cold, relentless pressure, as though the ocean itself was breathing around me. The water was no longer calm. There was a subtle, menacing current beneath me, pulling, urging me closer to whatever lay hidden in the dark. I leaned over the edge of the boat, straining my eyes to see through the murk. The glow grew brighter still, and I could make out the faintest shapes moving just beneath the surface. I shouldn't have looked. I should have turned around and gone back to shore, but the pull of curiosity was too strong. The creature, whatever it was down there, and I was going to find it. Then, in one fluid motion, the water exploded in a violent burst of movement. Something massive surged from below, sending a spray of water into the air. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer terror of what I had just witnessed. But there it was, the creature. The glowing eyes. The massive form, more shadow than substance, an enormous shape that seemed to shift and writhe beneath the water. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen. Its limbs were long and twisted, tentacles that curled and uncoiled with unnatural grace, like something alive, but not quite. I heard a sound then, a low, vibrating hum that resonated deep within my bones. It was a call, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that it was real. The sea devil was real, and it was closer than I had ever imagined. I backed away from the edge of the boat, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hands were shaking, the reality of what I was seeing beginning to sink in. The thing below me wasn't just a predator, it was something else, something that defied every explanation I had ever known. For a long moment, I simply stared, frozen, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was witnessing. The glow of its eyes flickered once more, as if it were studying me, assessing me like a piece of prey. I could feel it watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature vanished back into the deep. The water calmed, and the eerie silence returned. I sat there for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to speak. I had seen it. And I wasn't sure what terrified me more, the fact that I had seen the sea devil with my own eyes, or the feeling that it was only the beginning. I should have turned back. The moment that creature vanished into the depths, I should have turned my boat around, sailed back to shore, and never looked at the water the same way again. But I didn't. I stayed. Something in me, curiosity, fear, or perhaps a mix of both, kept me rooted to that spot, my eyes scanning the surface for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. The water was calm again, an eerie tranquility that didn't feel natural. It was too quiet. Too still. I told myself I had imagined it. That what I'd seen wasn't real. My mind, I thought, had played tricks on me. I'd been out on the water too long, too isolated, and the strain had caused my mind to conjure up something that wasn't there. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The days that followed only made it worse. Something about the place had changed. The air felt heavier, like the weight of something unseen pressed down on me, suffocating. I could hear sounds, subtle at first, barely perceptible. The soft slapping of water against the side of the boat, a low hum that seemed to echo from the depths. I thought it was just the wind, or perhaps the waves, but the more I listened, the more it felt like there was someone, or something, there, just beyond the edge of hearing. At night, the sounds grew louder. I would lie in my small cabin, staring out the window into the darkness, the fog creeping in from the shore, thick and oppressive. The creaking of the wood, the rustling of something in the bushes outside, it felt like eyes were watching me. But every time I would pull the blinds back, the world outside was still. Nothing moved. Nothing was there. But I couldn't shake the feeling. It was on the fourth night that it began to feel real. I had gone down to the dock to check my boat, making sure everything was secured before heading back to the house. The air was thick with mist, and the water mirrored the sky in a way that made everything look distorted, like I was seeing through a haze that wasn't quite right. I kept hearing that same low hum, distant but undeniable. It seemed to come from the water itself, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet, into my chest. I stopped at the edge of the dock, scanning the water. For a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw something moving just beneath the surface. A ripple, subtle but sharp, like a shadow passing underneath the boat. My heart lurched, my hands trembling as I gripped the wooden railing. But when I leaned over to look closer, the water was still. No sign of movement. No creature lurking. I told myself it was my imagination again, that I was just jumpy from the days of tension. But the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. The next day, things took another turn. I was working on the boat when I noticed something odd. There was a smear of dark, oily substance along the side of the hull. I rubbed my hand over it, expecting to feel some sort of natural grime, but it was slick, almost like something alive had touched it. I examined this substance more closely, but it didn't smell like anything I recognized. It was strange, too smooth, too unnatural. I wiped it off, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I tried to focus on the task at hand, the more my mind wandered. I kept hearing sounds, faint but clear, as though the boat was creaking under some unseen weight. And each time I looked over my shoulder, there was no one there. Then came the whispers. It started with something that could have been a trick of the wind or the rustling of trees nearby. But over time, the sounds grew clearer. Faint whispers, just out of reach, like voices coming from deep beneath the water. I couldn't understand them, but I knew what they were. It was as if the ocean itself was speaking to me, calling me deeper into its cold embrace. It wasn't just the sounds. It was the sense of being followed. I'd find my things moved, small, insignificant things, like the fishing rod I'd left by the door or the oars I'd leaned against the wall. They were never where I'd left them. A few times, I thought I caught a glimpse of something, someone, in the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing there. It was as if something, or someone, was just out of sight, always present, but never visible. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't just the paranoia, the stress of being alone out here for so long. It felt deliberate, as if I were being stalked. As if something out there in the fog wanted me to notice it, but only when it was ready. I began to question my own mind. Was I losing it? Was this all some product of the fear, of the isolation? But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I knew it wasn't. I knew I wasn't imagining things. The sea devil wasn't just a creature of the depths. It was something else. Something much older and much darker. And it was watching me. Always watching. I didn't want to believe it. Part of me still clung to the idea that the strange things happening around me were just a product of my own mind, of being isolated in this place too long. But the feeling that I was being watched, that I was never truly alone, was starting to eat away at my sanity. It wasn't just in the air, or in the subtle sounds that seemed to come from nowhere. It was something tangible, something undeniable. I had gone out on the water again, despite the growing unease gnawing at me. I couldn't stop myself. There was a pull, an irresistible need to confront whatever was lurking in the depths. The fog had rolled in thick that morning, cloaking the shoreline in a soft, suffocating haze. The kind of fog that made you feel as if the world had shrunk down to nothing but water and mist. The boat rocked gently as I rowed, the rhythmic dip of the oars in the water barely breaking the silence. But then, as I drifted further out, the air seemed to shift. The temperature dropped just a degree or two, but it was enough to make me shiver. The once silent water began to feel alive, each ripple moving with an unsettling purpose. My breath quickened, and I found myself straining to peer into the fog, as though expecting to see something, anything, emerge from the mist. And then I saw it. It started with the slightest disturbance in the water. At first, I thought it was just the current, but then I saw it more clearly. A long, sinuous shape moved beneath the surface, its outline shifting with unnatural grace. The water around it rippled violently, distorting in a way that wasn't right, as if something massive was pushing against it from below. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't breathe. I leaned over the side of the boat, peering into the water, my pulse thudding in my ears. The shadow was moving in a slow, deliberate pattern beneath me, almost like it was circling, as if it knew I was watching. It was too large to be any ordinary fish or creature. The size alone was enough to make the air in my lungs feel heavy, as though the sea itself was pressing in around me. And then, the eyes. Those glowing, malevolent eyes. For a moment, everything else in the world ceased to exist. There was just the dark water and the creature beneath it. The eyes pierced through the murk like twin lanterns, their light faint but unmistakable. I had seen them before, on that first terrifying day when I had ventured too far into the water, but now they were clearer, more focused. The light they emitted wasn't just a random glow, it was intentional. The creature was looking at me. A rush of panic surged through me, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The shadow beneath the water shifted again, and I could see it more clearly now. Tentacles, thick, undulating limbs that moved with fluid precision. They stretched, long and dark, curving through the water like something from a nightmare, brushing against the hull of my boat with a gentle but undeniable force. I instinctively pulled back, my hand gripping the side of the boat so tightly that my knuckles ached. The water surged again, this time more violently, and I heard the unmistakable sound of something massive moving just beneath me. A low, guttural rumble rose from the depths, the sound vibrating through the boat, rattling my bones. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong to this world, a sound that made the very air feel thick with dread. The creature was close. I could feel it. Panic set in, my breath quick and shallow. I tried to push the oars into the water, to move away from it, but it was as if the sea was holding me in place, its unseen grip tightening around the boat. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see the shoreline, but the fog had closed in even thicker, the world beyond the water hidden from view. I was alone, and the creature was still below me. The surface of the water began to churn, and I saw the outline of something huge, something ancient, moving with an almost predatory grace beneath the boat. It was so large, so massive, that I felt small in comparison. My mind raced, my heart hammering in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing, but there was no explanation for this. The creature was here. It wasn't just a myth or a legend, it was real. The shadow beneath the water grew larger, its form taking shape in the eerie glow of the creature's eyes. Tentacles began to rise, the dark limbs arching upwards, reaching toward the surface. My stomach churned, and a wave of nausea hit me as I realized just how much danger I was in. One of the tentacles grazed the side of the boat again, sending a ripple of panic through my body. It was slow, deliberate, as if it were testing me, toying with me. I gripped the oars with trembling hands, ready to push away, but the boat didn't move. The water around me seemed to resist, the surface becoming thick and oppressive, as though the sea itself was holding me here, forcing me to witness this horror. I glanced down again, and for the briefest moment, the creature's eyes locked with mine, glowing, predatory, filled with a hunger that I couldn't escape. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the shadow sank back into the depths, vanishing beneath the water with a suddenness that left me breathless. The water stilled, returning to an unnatural calm. The fog closed in tighter, the world around me growing silent once more. But I wasn't fooled. I had seen it. The sea devil wasn't a myth, it was real, and it had found me. And I had no idea how much longer I could survive the game it was playing. I couldn't stop shaking. My hands, still gripped tightly around the oars, were numb from the cold, but it wasn't the chill of the air or the water that made my skin crawl. It was the thing I had seen, the creature, the sea devil, whatever it was. For a long time, I just sat there, motionless, staring at the place where it had disappeared beneath the water, my mind desperately trying to convince itself that it wasn't real. I had to be imagining things. It had to be a trick of the fog, a hallucination brought on by the isolation. Maybe it was the darkness playing games with my mind. The eyes, those eyes, had to have been a reflection. The shadow? A trick of the light, or some strange current making the water swirl in unnatural patterns. There had to be a reasonable explanation. There always was. I told myself that over and over, but with every passing moment, the certainty in my thoughts slipped further away. Rationality was losing its grip on me, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest again, creeping slowly, insidiously. I pulled the boat back toward shore, my movements stiff and jerky, as though every part of me wanted to run, but my body wouldn't cooperate. When I finally set foot on solid ground, I staggered slightly, my legs unsteady beneath me. The world felt unmoored, like the shore itself might suddenly vanish beneath my feet. I had to tell myself it wasn't real. I had to. But when I looked out at the water from the dock, the fog rolling in like a blanket, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes darted back and forth across the water's surface, but there was nothing there. Nothing moving, nothing out of place. The dark water looked calm again, almost peaceful. But I knew better now. I had seen it, felt it. The shadow, the eyes, it was real. I stepped away from the edge of the dock, wiping my face with my sleeve, trying to steady my thoughts. My breathing was uneven, like I was gasping for air. I thought about going inside, locking the door, and pretending that everything was normal, that nothing had happened. But a voice in the back of my head refused to let me. It wouldn't leave me alone. The fear, the doubt, it was as if the creature's presence was inside me, consuming my thoughts. I tried to rationalize it again. The water had been murky. Maybe it was a whale or some kind of large fish, though it didn't explain the glowing eyes or the unmistakable sense of intelligence behind its movements. I had heard about the strange creatures that could sometimes be found in these waters, unidentified species, deep-sea dwellers, things that defied explanation. But this was something else. The shadow wasn't just big, it was otherworldly. And those eyes, no animal should have eyes like that. No animal should watch you like that. I took a few deep breaths, trying to clear my head. But then the whispers came again, soft, distant, but clear in the silence of the fog. The same voice I had heard before, only this time it felt closer. More real. I spun around, but there was no one there. Nothing but the fog pressing in all around me, the oppressive weight of it closing in on my senses. I tried to ignore it, to just focus on getting to safety. But the whispers didn't stop. I started walking quickly toward the cabin, my steps uneven, my mind spinning in a whirlwind of doubt and fear. The fog seemed to follow me, swirling around my ankles as I moved, as if the very air was closing in around me. I could hear my breath, loud in my ears, and the pounding of my heart felt like it might burst through my chest. Every part of me screamed to run, to get out of there, but I couldn't. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was happening to me. Maybe I could still find a way to explain this, some rational explanation. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the more I tried to deny it, the stronger the creature's hold on me became. It was out there, lurking beneath the water, waiting for me to come back. And I couldn't stay away. As I reached the cabin, I turned around, half expecting to see the shape in the water again, to feel the eyes on me, to hear the deep rumbling of the sea pulling me toward it. But the water was still. There was no movement. No shadow. No eyes. Yet, somehow, I knew that it was still there. I couldn't escape it. Not anymore. The creature had marked me, and my doubts had grown too strong for me to deny it any longer. I was trapped. The next day, I woke to the faint sound of the sea crashing against the rocks, a rhythmic lullaby that used to comfort me. Now, it felt like a warning, a reminder of what was waiting for me beneath the water. I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to force myself to be logical, to take control of my thoughts. I needed to focus on something else. Maybe I had just been overwhelmed by the isolation, the stress of being out here for so long. I'd seen something, yes, but maybe it wasn't what I thought it was. There were explanations. People saw things in the fog all the time. But deep down, I knew better. Something in me had shifted, and I couldn't undo it. The creature, the sea devil, wasn't just some story. It was real, and it was coming for me. The fog rolled in again, thick and unrelenting, swallowing the horizon until it felt like the world had collapsed into a gray, featureless void. The cabin felt smaller, more oppressive, as the mist crept in around the walls, a constant reminder of the world beyond that was now filled with terror. I tried to stay busy, working on the boat, trying to distract myself, but the unease gnawed at me. By midday, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go out. I had to know. With a mix of dread and resolve, I grabbed the oars and pushed the boat into the water. The fog was heavier than before, clinging to the surface like a thick veil. I knew the water would be cold, but that didn't matter. It was the waiting that terrified me. I had to confront the creature, or it would haunt me forever. As I rowed further out, I felt a strange tension in the air, like something was building, gathering beneath the surface. The fog was so thick now, I could barely see past the end of the boat. My hands gripped the oars tightly, but they felt slippery in my palms, as though the moisture in the air was seeping into my skin, chilling me from the inside out. I glanced down at the water, half expecting to see the shadow again. The ripples of my oars broke the surface, but there was no sign of anything unusual. The world around me was eerily silent, and for a moment, I almost dared to believe that maybe I was wrong, that I had imagined everything. Then it came. At first, it was just a faint disturbance beneath the water, almost like a ripple, an unnatural swirl. But as I leaned over the side of the boat to get a better look, the water around me began to move in a pattern that sent a chill through my entire body. It was slow at first, as though whatever was underneath was testing the waters, but then the water shuddered, a deep, unsettling movement that made my stomach drop. From beneath the surface, the shadow appeared again, larger this time, stretching wider across the water. The size of it took my breath away. I felt the boat shudder slightly as the creature's massive form moved just beneath me. The water rippled violently, and then I saw it, the eyes. Those glowing, malevolent eyes, rising from the depths like twin lanterns. But this time, I wasn't just seeing the eyes. I was seeing more. The thing was rising. Tentacles began to emerge from the water, thick and powerful, the dark limbs curling and undulating as they broke the surface. The sheer size of them made my heart race. Each tentacle was as thick as the trunk of a tree, the suckers glistening with a wet sheen. They moved with an unnatural grace, as if the creature itself had no weight, no burden on the water's surface. It was as though the ocean bent to its will. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't dealing with some isolated creature, a freak of nature. This was something ancient, something that belonged to the depths of the ocean, something that had been here long before human eyes had ever gazed upon the water. The sea devil was alive, and it was looking directly at me. I froze. My body locked in place, unable to move, unable to think. My breath hitched in my chest as the creature's tentacles stretched closer, the tips brushing against the side of the boat with a slow, deliberate motion. The water around me grew colder, and I felt as though the very air had thickened, pressing in from all sides. It was suffocating, this sense of wrongness, this unnatural presence in the water. The creature's eyes gleamed, now brighter than before, and I swore I saw something more in them, intelligence. Malice. They weren't just looking at me, they were studying me, as though savoring the fear that was radiating off of me in waves. The boat rocked violently as one of the tentacles brushed against it, causing me to lose my balance. I nearly fell into the water, but something inside me, the same part that had been screaming for me to flee, kept me from letting go. But it wasn't just the creature's size, or its glowing eyes that paralyzed me. It was the way it moved, the fluidity of its motions that defied any logic I had ever known. It was as though it wasn't bound by the laws of nature. It was the water, moving through it as easily as air. And I was nothing more than a helpless speck in its domain. I wanted to scream, to throw myself into the water and try to escape, but my body wouldn't obey. Every instinct in me screamed that I was in the presence of something other, something ancient and monstrous, and I was its prey. The water around the boat stirred again, and I saw the creature's massive form shift beneath the surface. It was rising with an intensity that I could no longer deny. My mind shattered, and I could feel the dread consuming me. I was alone, trapped in the fog with a monster that had no reason to spare me. The sea devil had been awakened, and it had found me. The world began to blur, the only thing clear in my vision were those eyes, glowing with a hunger that made my skin crawl. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, the creature began to pull itself closer. The next few days felt like they had stretched into weeks. Time had become meaningless, each hour blending into the next as I sat in the silence of the cabin, consumed by thoughts of the creature. I had seen it. No, I knew it was real now. There was no denying it, no pretending that it was just a figment of my imagination or some local myth designed to scare away outsiders. The sea devil was real, and it was waiting beneath the water. I couldn't shake the image of its glowing eyes, staring directly at me from the depths. The way it moved, almost gracefully, as though it was the very essence of the ocean itself. The sheer size of it, the massive tentacles, the dark shadow that rippled beneath the surface. Everything about the creature filled me with a mix of awe and terror, a fascination so deep that it consumed every waking thought. I had tried to push the thoughts aside, to convince myself that I could move on, that I was overreacting. But no matter how hard I tried, the sea devil would not leave me alone. It lingered in my mind, like a shadow that followed me everywhere, even when I wasn't near the water. I started dreaming of it, those eyes, those tentacles, the cold, suffocating presence that seemed to seep into every corner of my mind. I could feel it pulling at me, like a magnetic force that I couldn't escape. I began to study everything I could find about the creature. Old records, books about the ocean, anything that might shed light on what I was dealing with. But the more I read, the more questions I had. There were no real answers, just cryptic references to ancient sea monsters, creatures of the deep, and legends of the lost. The sea devil was something other, something that didn't belong in any of the stories I've read. It was as if it had been hiding, waiting in the depths of the ocean for centuries, biding its time until it was ready to make itself known. I spent hours combing through the local library, searching for anything that might explain its origins. But there was nothing. No mention of a creature like the one I had encountered. The fisherman had been right. It wasn't a ghost story, or an exaggeration. This thing was real, and it had lived for far longer than any of us. It had been here before humans, before the first ships had sailed these waters, and it would be here long after I was gone. The more I thought about it, the more the obsession gripped me. I couldn't stop thinking about the creature, about what it wanted, why it had chosen me, or if it had chosen me at all. Maybe it was just the wrong place at the wrong time, a random victim of its hunger. But the more I stared into the water, the more I felt like it was drawn to me, as though I was part of its plans, part of its ancient cycle. I had to know more. I had to get closer. The thought of returning to the water terrified me, but it also pulled at me with an undeniable force. The questions I had, the need for answers, drowned out the fear. I couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. I had to face the creature again, to understand it, to see what it truly was. I couldn't let it haunt me any longer. There was a strange, almost sickening comfort in this obsession. As if by seeking out the sea devil, I could somehow make it all make sense. The more I learned, the more I could understand what had been lurking in the shadows beneath the water, and perhaps, just perhaps, I could survive it. Or, at the very least, die knowing the truth. I started preparing. I gathered supplies, anything I might need to survive another encounter. A flare gun, extra food, or rope. Something to defend myself with, though I knew deep down that nothing would be enough. The sea devil wasn't something that could be fought or escaped. But I couldn't stop myself. The urge to confront it, to face whatever it was, became all-consuming. I had to see it again, had to understand what it truly was, even if it meant sacrificing everything else. I was already too far gone. There was no turning back now. As I loaded the boat with the supplies and stepped out onto the dock, I couldn't help but notice the change in the air. The fog was thicker than ever, rolling in from the water like a living thing, curling around the edges of the cabin, creeping into the corners of my mind. It felt as though the sea devil was already out there, waiting for me to return. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for what would happen next, but I knew I had no choice. With a deep breath, I pushed the boat into the water, the coldness of the ocean seeping through the soles of my shoes. The fog closed in, and the world around me disappeared as I rode further from shore, further into the unknown. The sea devil was waiting, and I was about to meet it again. This time, there would be no turning back. The further I ventured into the waters, the more I felt a subtle but unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. The air grew heavier, denser, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The fog, which had been a constant presence ever since I arrived, seemed to have deepened, its fingers stretching further out over the water, swallowing everything in its path. The world around me blurred, and I could barely make out the distant shore. The water was eerily still. No wind, no waves. It should have been comforting, this tranquility, but it only made my skin crawl. The silence felt unnatural, oppressive, as though the world itself was holding its breath. My boat cut through the calm surface, leaving only a faint ripple behind, but it seemed to disappear too quickly. The stillness of the water seemed to mock the urgency in my chest, my heart pounding as I rode deeper. The fog thickened, curling around me like a living thing. At first, it was just a few patches, then it spread, swirling in slow, deliberate movements, cutting off my view of the world beyond. I squinted into the growing mist, but I could see nothing except the gray blur of the water, the outline of the boat, and the occasional shadow passing through the fog. Whether it was the movement of the boat or something else, I couldn't be sure. Then came the sounds. At first, it was almost imperceptible, just a whisper beneath the usual creak of the boat, a sound too soft to identify. A faint splash. A ripple that didn't come from my oars. I stopped paddling for a moment, listening. Nothing. But then, again, I heard it, a distant, almost imperceptible groan, like the sound of something heavy scraping against the ocean floor. It was followed by the sharp, eerie splintering of wood, as if a boat had been cracked under the weight of something immense. I stared into the fog, my heart skipping a beat. There was nothing there. No other boats, no sign of movement. The water was calm, too calm, and yet the air was charged, like a storm was about to break. Then, without warning, the temperature seemed to drop. A coldness seeped into the air, the kind that you feel deep in your bones. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders, shivering despite the lack of wind. But it wasn't just the cold, it was the way the water responded. The surface, which had been smooth and glassy moments before, now rippled in unnatural, slow waves, as if something was pushing against it from below. I glanced nervously around, trying to catch a glimpse of anything, but the fog obscured everything, turning the world into an endless gray void. My pulse quickened. It wasn't just the stillness or the fog that unsettled me now. It was the way the air seemed to thicken, as if the environment itself was changing, becoming something else, something alien, something dangerous. As I rode farther, the water became more erratic, as though it were alive, shifting beneath the surface in odd patterns. It wasn't the gentle rocking of the boat caused by waves or wind, it was something far more deliberate, as though the sea was testing my presence, probing me. I could almost feel the weight of whatever lay beneath me, shifting in the depths, waiting. The sounds continued, subtle, unnerving sounds that seemed to come from all directions, just beyond the edge of my hearing. A slither, like wet tentacles dragging across the seabed. A deep that resonated through the water, vibrating up from the depths, just beyond reach. I gripped the oars tightly, my knuckles white, trying to stay calm. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that the strange sounds were only the creaks of the boat or the movement of the water. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The water had changed. The fog had changed. The air had changed. And every instinct in my body screamed that the sea devil wasn't just a creature from the depths anymore, it was something that had already marked me, already begun to follow me. A shadow passed just beneath the surface, long and sinuous, like a ribbon of darkness threading through the water. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared, but it left me shaken, my breath caught in my throat. I stopped paddling. The fog around me thickened, pulling the world into an impenetrable silence. I could barely see my hands on the oars, the water in front of me completely vanished into the gray. Then, a low rumble vibrated through the boat. A deep, earth-shaking growl that seemed to come from beneath the surface. I was no longer alone. I knew, without a doubt, that the sea devil was here, just beneath me, and it was no longer a creature of myth. It was real. And it was watching me. The days following my first real encounter with the sea devil blurred together, each one feeling more oppressive than the last. I couldn't shake the sense of being hunted, of something watching me from just beyond the reach of the fog. The water, once a source of fascination, had become a vast, unknown terror. Every ripple, every strange sound, sent a fresh wave of panic crashing over me. I tried to push forward, to convince myself that I was just imagining things. But the warnings from the locals haunted me, each word, every cryptic glance and half-spoken caution, like a voice in the back of my mind urging me to turn back before it was too late. I went into town again, hoping that a brief interaction with the people who lived there would bring some sense of normalcy. Maybe I could shake off the feeling of dread that had taken root in my bones. But as I walked along the pier, I couldn't help but notice the uneasy glances people shot my way. They knew. They all knew. It was an older fisherman who approached me first. He was the kind of man whose face had been weathered by years spent under the sun and salt water, his hands calloused and rough from the constant pull of the nets. His eyes were sharp, though, filled with an unnerving knowledge. He didn't smile as he stepped up beside me, just looked out at the water for a long moment before speaking. "You've seen it," haven't you?" he asked, his voice low, gravelly. I froze, a chill crawling up my spine. The question wasn't what I ever expected to hear from him, someone so familiar with the sea, someone who should have written off my worries as the ramblings of an outsider. But there it was, plain as day. "WH, what do you mean?" I stammered, though deep down I already knew. "The sea devil," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I've heard the stories, seen it myself. There's no escaping it once it's noticed you. You're marked now." I opened my mouth to respond, to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Something about his tone, the certainty in his eyes, left me speechless. He continued, his voice almost a whisper. "People think it's just a myth, a tale for the tourists. But I've seen it. Saw it once, years ago, on a night just like tonight. Thought I'd go mad. It watches you, and then it waits." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling like a stone in my stomach. Wait? Wait for what? His gaze shifted to the water, and for a moment, I could see the flicker of something dark, something he wasn't telling me. "Wait for you to come to it. Or for it to come to you," he muttered, before turning away, his old boots dragging against the dock as he left me standing there, more unsettled than ever. I stood there for a long time, the sound of the waves against the pier doing little to calm the storm brewing in my mind. The sea devil, he was right. It had been watching me, marking me. But why? What did it want with me? As I turned to walk back to the cabin, I bumped into another fisherman. This one was younger, though his eyes held the same knowledge, the kind of knowledge that comes with experience and a deeper understanding of the things the sea hides. His face went pale when he saw me, his mouth opening and closing as though he was debating whether or not to speak. "You've been out there, haven't you?" he asked, his voice tight. I nodded, too weary to lie. "Don't go back," he said quickly, almost desperately. "I've heard what happens. I've seen it with my own eyes. A man I know, he went out at night, just like you. The fog was thick, but it was a calm night. And then, nothing. He never came back. A week later, his boat was found, empty, no sign of him. I could feel my stomach lurch, the memory of the shadow beneath the water rising in my mind. The man was silent for a moment, his gaze flickering over my shoulder as though searching for something just out of view. "They say the sea devil doesn't just take you," he said, his voice low, trembling slightly. "It drags you. Makes you see things, hear things. And when it's done, it leaves you, broken. A shell of who you were." I shivered, not from the cold but from the depth of his words. The fear was evident in his eyes, but there was something else too, something that felt like guilt. Like he knew more than he was letting on. "Just stay away from the water," he added, almost pleading, before turning quickly and walking away. I watched him go, my mind racing. Two fishermen, both of them warning me, both of them speaking in the same hushed tones, as though the creature itself might be listening. And as they spoke, the realization began to sink in, they weren't just trying to keep me safe. They were trying to warn me, yes, but also to protect themselves from the fear that came with knowing the truth. I was in over my head. This wasn't just about a creature in the sea, it was about something deeper, something that had been part of this place for longer than I could understand. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became the sea devil wasn't just a threat to me. It had its claws deep in this town, its presence hanging over the fishermen, its shadow stretching out far beyond the waters. And now, I was trapped in it too. The days began to blur into a haze of anxiety and fear, each moment stretching endlessly, suffocating me. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was the water, still, cold, and endless. I could hear the distant rumblings of the sea devil in the back of my mind, the scraping sounds, the deep growl that seemed to echo in the depths. I felt its presence even while I wasn't near the shore, as though the creature had somehow wrapped itself around my very thoughts, gnawing at my sanity. My reflection in the mirror looked different too. The bags under my eyes were darker, my skin pale, my face drawn tight with the constant tension. It felt as though I had aged years in the span of just a few days. I hadn't spoken to anyone in town since my last encounters. I couldn't bring myself to. Their warnings were too real, too heavy. And yet, I couldn't stop myself from going back. Every time I stepped away from the water, it called to me. It wasn't just a fear anymore, it was an obsession. I would walk down to the pier at night, staring out at the vast emptiness of the sea, hoping, wishing for some kind of answer to this madness. But there was no answer. Only the darkness, the fog that never quite lifted, and the whispering wind that carried the scent of the ocean deep into my lungs. I felt my heartbeat in my throat every time I went near the water. My pulse would quicken, my hands would tremble, and my stomach would twist into tight knots. But still, I couldn't stay away. The pull was too strong. It felt as if the sea itself had some kind of hold on me, like it knew something I didn't, a truth I was meant to uncover, whether I wanted to or not. I remember one night, standing alone on the dock, staring into the abyss. The fog had thickened once again, wrapping the world in a suffocating shroud of gray. The water stretched out before me, smooth as glass, reflecting nothing but the dark sky. My eyes scanned the surface, searching for any sign of movement, but I saw nothing. Just the eerie, silent expanse. Then, I heard it. A faint splash, followed by another. It wasn't a splash like the ones I'd heard before, the ones that seemed to come from nowhere. No, this was different. This was deliberate, rhythmic. Like someone, was swimming just beneath the surface, circling, waiting. I froze, my breath caught in my chest. My first instinct was to run, to turn and escape this madness that had slowly consumed my mind. But I couldn't. My feet felt heavy, as though the dock was pulling me down. Slowly, I took a step forward. Then another. The fog was thicker now, nearly blinding. The edges of the pier blurred into nothingness, and for a moment, I felt like I was standing on the edge of the world. My hands were clammy, my chest tight, but I was drawn forward. The water, it was calling me, whispering to me. I took another step. I don't know why. Part of me wanted to scream at myself to stop, to turn around and run back to the cabin where it was safe. But I couldn't move. My mind felt like it was no longer my own. Fear, mixed with curiosity, tugged me forward. And then I saw it. Two eyes. Glowing, deep within the water, staring back at me. They weren't the eyes of a man or any creature I could recognize. They were the eyes of something ancient, something primal. They gleamed with a cold, unholy light, like twin orbs of pure darkness, burning against the gray. I should have turned away, should have run for my life. But I didn't. I couldn't. The gaze held me in place, paralyzed, as though the creature beneath the surface had woven a spell over me, ensnaring my very soul. The surface of the water rippled, a slow, undulating motion, as if the creature beneath it was coming closer. The eyes stayed fixed on mine, unblinking, unwavering. They were patient, waiting for something, waiting for me, perhaps. My breath was ragged, each inhale sharp, each exhale shallow. My legs trembled, my mind screamed for me to run, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, helpless in the face of whatever was beneath the water. The fear was overwhelming, suffocating, yet there was something else, something that felt like need. A compulsion I couldn't understand. The urge to dive in, to meet the creature face to face, to let it consume me. I took a step closer. The cold mist wrapped around me, the water lapping against the dock, now louder, more insistent. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the glow vanished. The eyes were gone, swallowed by the depths, leaving nothing but the rippling water and the quiet hum of the sea. I blinked, feeling a sharp pang of emptiness. My legs finally gave out beneath me, and I collapsed onto the dock, gasping for air as if I had been holding my breath for a lifetime. The creature was still there, I knew it. Waiting. Watching. But now, I wasn't sure if I was running toward it or if it had already drawn me in. Fear had taken hold of me completely, yet I still couldn't stay away. I couldn't stop myself from going back. I didn't want to. The night I decided to take the boat out on the water was the one I knew would change everything. The air had grown colder, and the fog was thicker than ever before, wrapping the shore in a dense, impenetrable cloak. There was something in the air, something almost tangible, that made my nerves flare. But still, I couldn't resist. The pull of the sea devil had been building inside me, a gnawing itch that refused to let me go. If I stayed on the shore any longer, I knew I would lose my mind. The boat creaked beneath my weight as I rowed further from the safety of the land. The water was eerily still, too still, and the sound of my words slicing through it felt out of place. Everything felt too quiet, too perfect. And yet, deep in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was wrong. I had told myself I was prepared for this moment, that I was simply going out there to confront my fear, to see the creature with my own eyes and finally know the truth. I had armed myself with nothing more than my mind, trying to rationalize everything away. But the closer I got to the center of the lake, the more that feeling of dread crept over me, settling heavily in my chest. The fog closed in around me, the world becoming a disorienting blur of gray. My heart thudded in my chest, the sound nearly drowning out everything else. I tried to focus, trying to hold on to any semblance of control, but the whispers of the sea seemed to invade my thoughts. And then, the water began to move. At first, it was subtle. A ripple, barely noticeable, just beneath the surface. I stopped rowing, holding my breath as I stared into the foggy expanse, trying to discern what I was seeing. The ripples grew larger, faster, as if something beneath the water was stirring, just out of reach. My heart raced. I knew what it was. The sea devil. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine as I strained my eyes, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever lay hidden beneath the water. But all I could see was the faint reflection of the fog, the soft shadows cast by the moon. Still, the ripples grew stronger, more deliberate. Something was circling, moving in a pattern, and I could feel it drawing closer, closer, with every passing moment. Then, a sudden splash echoed across the water. It wasn't the sound of something small breaking the surface. No, this was much larger, more powerful, like a massive weight had fallen into the water. The boat lurched beneath me, and I had to grip the sides to keep myself steady. My eyes darted around, searching for the source, but all I could see was a wall of fog, the ripples growing larger and more violent with each passing second. And then, there it was. Two glowing eyes appeared, breaking through the surface, their eerie light casting long shadows across the water. They were massive, far too large to belong to anything normal. They gleamed like twin beacons, casting a sickly glow that illuminated the darkened water around them. I froze. The eyes didn't blink. They just stared. Unblinking, unfeeling, like two holes in the darkness. A feeling of pure terror flooded through me. I had come here to face it, to see the creature up close, but this was more than I could have ever imagined. The beast beneath the water was watching me, studying me, as if deciding whether I was worth the effort. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn and row as fast as I could back to the shore, but my body wouldn't move. My hands were glued to the sides of the boat, my eyes locked on those glowing orbs that burned into my soul. The creature made no move, but I could feel the tension building. It was waiting, calculating. Suddenly, without warning, the water erupted. The boat rocked violently as something massive slammed into it from beneath. I was thrown off balance, my heart in my throat as the boat teetered dangerously, almost tipping. Panic surged within me as I scrambled to regain control. The water churned violently, waves crashing around the small boat, as if the sea devil had suddenly decided that I wasn't meant to leave. The eyes disappeared beneath the surface, but the ripples continued, growing stronger, faster, as though the creature was circling me, just beneath the waterline, its massive body moving with impossible speed. I could feel the cold, slick tendrils of fear clutching at me as I fought to keep the boat steady. My breaths were ragged, my pulse thundering in my ears as I realized how utterly helpless I was out here, at the mercy of something ancient, something beyond comprehension. Another splash. Another jolt. I screamed then, my voice cracking as I pulled at the oars, desperately trying to push the boat away from the epicenter of the madness. But the creature wasn't finished. It wasn't going to let me go that easily. The water churned violently, splashing against the sides of the boat as something massive rose just beneath the surface. The glowing eyes reappeared for a split second, closer now, so close that I could feel the pull of its presence as if it was drawing me in. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My hands trembled on the oars, my vision blurring with fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had all started, the water stilled. I looked around, heart still pounding, but the eyes were gone. The ripples faded, leaving behind nothing but the calm surface of the water. I was alone again. Shaken, soaked in cold sweat, I rowed with everything I had, making my way back to shore, not daring to look back. I didn't know if it had been a warning, a test, or something more sinister, but one thing was certain, the sea devil was real. And it was hunting me. By the time I reached the dock, my hands were numb from the cold, and my entire body was trembling. I stumbled out of the boat, my legs unsteady, the world spinning around me. But I didn't look back at the water. I couldn't. Because I knew, deep down, that it wasn't finished with me. The night I spent trying to outrun the fear had done little to calm the storm inside me. My body was exhausted, my mind frayed by the events I couldn't explain, but despite everything, I couldn't stop thinking about the sea devil. The glowing eyes, the crushing sense of inevitability that had gripped me out there on the water, no matter how much I tried to deny it, a part of me knew the creature had been watching me, waiting for me to come closer. And in some twisted way, that knowledge haunted me even more than the creature itself. I couldn't rest until I knew the truth. When dawn broke, its pale light only made the thought of the water more oppressive. It was as though I could feel the creature beneath the surface, just waiting for the right moment to rise again. But instead of retreating, instead of locking myself away like everyone else in this town, I made up my mind. I would go back. I would go deeper than I ever had before. I had to know what it wanted, what it truly was, and, if I was being honest with myself, what it could do to me. I had to face it head on, confront the terror that had consumed me. That morning, I visited the old pier where the fishermen gathered. The same place I'd heard the cryptic warnings, where the locals spoke in hushed tones about the sea devil. But now, I wasn't there for stories. I was there for tools, for preparation. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, and I knew it might be my last chance to come out alive. The men, as usual, gave me strange looks as I approached, their weathered faces lined with suspicion. No one spoke right away, and for a moment, I felt like an outsider again, like I wasn't supposed to be here. But I didn't care. My mission was set, and I couldn't turn back now. I found an old, weather-beaten boat in the back of the dock. It looked like it had seen its better days, the wood creaking as I inspected it. But it would do. I gathered some basic supplies, a flashlight, a knife, a thick rope, and tried not to think about the cold grip of dread that had settled back into my chest. As I walked along the dock, a few of the fishermen called out to me, their voices tinged with disbelief. "Going back out there again, kid?" one of them asked, his voice gruff, yet curious. I didn't respond. I couldn't. What could I say to explain that the creature had imprinted itself on my mind, that it wasn't just a myth, but something real, something powerful? They didn't believe me the first time, and I wasn't sure I believed it myself, not fully. But I couldn't let it go. I couldn't leave Cape Cod without knowing if I was meant to die at the hands of the sea devil or if I could survive it. With the boat ready, I rowed out toward the center of the lake again, my heart racing as the water closed in around me. The same eerie stillness hung in the air, the fog creeping across the surface as I drifted further from shore. The boat groaned beneath me, the wood protesting each movement, but I pushed on. I had to reach the spot where I had seen the eyes, the place where the creature had shown itself. As I rode deeper into the heart of the lake, the fear began to rise again, building in my throat. I wasn't ready for this. I knew it, but there was no turning back now. My hand gripped the oar tighter, knuckles white from the pressure. I was doing this for answers, for closure, or maybe just for survival. The fog began to thicken, its presence oppressive, until the world around me had shrunk to a circle of damp gray. My heartbeat echoed loudly in my ears, drowning out the soft creaks of the boat, the occasional splash of water. And then, as I passed the area where I had seen the glowing eyes, I felt it. The shift in the air. The silence. The water seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something. The stillness was suffocating, and I could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on me, pulling me toward the dark depths below. I stopped rowing, letting the boat drift, and stared into the water. Nothing. The fog was too thick, and the surface too smooth to see anything beneath it. But the sensation, the feeling of something waiting, was unmistakable. The sea devil was down there, I could feel it, lurking just beneath the surface, watching. I had no idea what I was doing. This wasn't about facing my fear anymore, it was about something far more dangerous. I need to understand, to prove that I wasn't just another victim to its legend. "Come out," I whispered under my breath, though my voice trembled. I didn't know if I was ready for whatever came next. But there was no turning back. Not now. The fog pressed in tighter, and the oppressive silence seemed to stretch for eternity. The feeling that something was beneath me, something watching and waiting, was unbearable. I tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The sea devil wasn't real, it couldn't be. But every instinct in my body screamed otherwise. The water was unnaturally still, as if it too were holding its breath, waiting for me to make my next move. And then, suddenly, the boat jolted violently. I barely had time to react. A force, something powerful, something alive, yanked at the hull of the boat, sending it into a rapid spin. I tried to grab hold of the sides, my fingers slipping against the wet wood as the boat rocked dangerously from side to side. The world around me blurred as panic surged, and I was thrown off balance, falling forward into the icy water. The cold hit me like a shock to the system, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The fog was thick, swallowing up the sounds of the world around me. I kicked, my limbs moving instinctively, but I was disoriented, struggling to find my bearings. The water churned beneath me, thick with movement. Something was pulling me. I could feel it. A current. A powerful, unnatural current. It surged beneath me like a living thing, twisting and pulling, dragging me away from the boat. I gasped for air, panic rising in my chest, but every stroke I took only seemed to pull me deeper into the chaos. My limbs grew heavy as I fought against the water, each movement feeling like I was swimming through molasses. The current was relentless. I couldn't see anything in the fog. I couldn't even hear the boat anymore, it had been swallowed by the distance. My breath came in sharp gasps, my heart pounding as I tried to stay above water. But it was no use. The current was too strong. I felt like a helpless insect caught in a spider's web, each second pulling me deeper into its grip. I tried to scream, but the words were lost in the violent rush of water. My body was going numb from the cold, the panic blurring my thoughts. Was this it? Was I going to die out here alone, swallowed by the depths, just another victim of the sea devil? I fought harder, trying to orient myself, trying to find something solid to cling to. But there was nothing, only the endless stretch of water, the fog, the sense of something waiting just beneath the surface. The cold began to overwhelm me. I could feel the pressure building in my chest, my lungs aching for air, but I couldn't seem to take in enough. I was losing the battle. My muscles screamed in protest, each stroke growing weaker, slower. I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on. That's why I saw it. A shadow beneath the surface. Massive, dark, and moving with an unnatural grace. It shifted and twisted through the water, moving closer to me, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe altogether. Was it the sea devil? I tried to swim away, my body jerking with panic, but the current only pulled me closer to the shadow. I could see its shape more clearly now, its dark outline moving with an unsettling fluidity beneath me. It was massive, far larger than anything I had ever seen. The sense of dread was overwhelming. It wasn't just an animal. It was something more, something ancient and terrifying. Something that knew the water better than I ever could. And then the current shifted again, pulling me down with a force that felt like it was coming from the very depths of the ocean. My head plunged under the water, and for a moment, everything went black. I struggled, my chest aching as I fought for air, but I couldn't escape. The pull was too strong. My vision blurred, and the water closed in around me, swallowing me whole. I had to get out. I had to survive. Frantic, I kicked and clawed at the water, forcing my way back to the surface, gasping for air when I finally broke free. My arms burned with the effort, but I wasn't ready to give up. I wasn't ready to die in this cursed lake. But the current didn't let up. It was relentless. It dragged at me like something that knew exactly what it wanted, knew exactly how to break me. And that's why I felt it again. The pull wasn't just the current. Something beneath the water was guiding it. The sea devil wasn't just a creature of the depths, it was a force of nature. And I was its prey. I thought I had seen terror before, but nothing prepared me for what happened next. The water beneath me shifted again, and the pressure increased, dragging me down despite every desperate kick I made to stay afloat. My arms were weak, and my body was beginning to give in to the cold and exhaustion, but something within me, something primal, refused to let go. I couldn't drown. Not here. Not like this. And then, out of the suffocating darkness of the water, I saw it. A shape. A massive, undulating figure moving beneath the surface. At first, it was just a blur, a dark shadow in the depths, but as it grew closer, I could see it more clearly, glowing eyes, pale and otherworldly, staring at me from the abyss. They were the same eyes I had seen before, in the fog, in the lake, but now they were impossibly close, unblinking and filled with something, hungry. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared down at them. For a moment, I wondered if my mind had finally snapped, if the isolation, the fear, had driven me to conjure up this monstrosity. But no! These eyes were real. I could feel their weight, their presence in my very bones, dragging me closer to the darkness. The creature, the sea devil, shifted again, the water around it rippling and churning as if it were alive, responding to its every movement. It was enormous, far larger than I had ever imagined. The glowing eyes blinked, and the creature moved, slowly at first, as if sizing me up, before it began to edge closer. A wave of panic hit me again, but this time it was different. I wasn't just terrified, I was compelled. There was something in those eyes, something hypnotic, something that called to me from the depths. I couldn't look away. My body moved against my will, each breath feeling more and more shallow as I was drawn closer to the creature, to the dark water it called home. I tried to fight it, tried to scream out, but my voice was swallowed by the rush of water and the growing pressure in my chest. The water, once cold and indifferent, now felt alive, pushing me down, pulling me under its surface. I wanted to swim away, to escape, but it was as if the very current was no longer in my control. I wasn't swimming, I was sinking, pulled down by an invisible force that seemed to come from the creature itself. The sea devil's shape became clearer with every second. I could see its massive limbs, tentacles, I realized, twisting in the dark water, their movement fluid and unnervingly graceful. They were far too long, far too many, curling and spiraling beneath the surface, each one like a ghostly arm reaching toward me. I could feel the tug of the water as the creature's limbs coiled, tightening the grip around me, drawing me deeper into its domain. And then it spoke. Not in words, not in a voice, but in a sensation, a pulse, a vibration that resonated deep in my chest. It was as if the very water around me hummed with its presence, calling me into the abyss. My mind screamed to escape, to flee, but the pull was too strong. The eyes glowed brighter, as if the creature were feeding on my fear, drawing me deeper. The closer I got to the creature, the more I felt it, this terrible, overwhelming sense of belonging. I didn't understand it at first, but it became clearer with every movement I made, every inch closer to the depths. The sea devil wasn't just pulling me down. It was inviting me in. It was coaxing me, luring me, offering me the darkness of the water as if it were a second home, a place where fear no longer mattered. I couldn't resist. I couldn't stop myself from being drawn into its grip. I was so close now, my head just inches above the surface. The air felt thick, as if it was becoming harder to breathe, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. I was so close. My hands reached out toward the surface of the water, and I could almost feel the cold pressure of the creature's massive form just beneath me. Then, a tentacle shot up from the depths, wrapping around my legs, pulling me under in one swift, powerful motion. I gasped, water filling my lungs, and for a moment, I thought I was done. Drowning. No escape. But still, I could feel it, the creature, its immense presence beneath me, its eyes still watching, still pulling me deeper. My body went limp in its grasp, and in that moment, I understood. The sea devil wasn't just after my life, it was after my soul. And there was no escape. The darkness around me swallowed everything. The water churned, its cold fingers pulling me deeper as the sea devil's grip tightened. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, the weight of the water crushing me as the pressure increased, and I thought, for a brief, fleeting moment, that this was it. That I had finally succumbed to the depths of the ocean. But then something changed. The water around me seemed to shift, as if it were parting, and a strange warmth began to envelop me, an unnatural heat, like the air before a storm. It was suffocating, disorienting. And then, as if pulled by some unseen force, I found myself somewhere else. The fog, the cold, the relentless pull of the water, all of it faded. I was no longer drowning. I was standing, surrounded by darkness, the oppressive silence stretching on in every direction. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was trapped in a place that felt both alien and familiar. It was as if I had been pulled into the creature's very mind, a realm where thoughts and memories twisted like the currents beneath the surface. I tried to call out, but no sound came. My body felt like it was no longer my own, as if I were an observer rather than a participant in this twisted reality. The water, too, was gone. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. I wasn't alone. The sea devil was here, too. It was all around me, its presence suffocating, closing in with an unnatural weight. And then, the vision began. It started with a ripple, a flash of memory, so vivid that it nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. I saw a great storm, a fierce tempest that tore through a small coastal village. I saw fishermen, their boats tossed by the waves, struggling against the furious sea. But then, from the depths, a massive shape rose, a shadow in the water that dwarfed the boats. Its glowing eyes burned through the storm, and with a single, crushing movement, the boats were dragged under, swallowed by the dark, roiling depths. The villagers screamed, their cries lost to the wind and the waves. But it didn't end there. I saw more. I saw it happen again and again, in different places, on different nights. The creature, the sea devil, emerging from the deep, always in the darkest hours, always when the storm was at its worst. It moved through the waters like a king, luring sailors to their doom with its glowing eyes, its massive limbs wrapping around their boats, dragging them down to the inescapable dark. But it wasn't just the boats. It wasn't just the fishermen. The vision twisted and contorted, and suddenly, I was no longer watching from the outside. I was there, in the depths with them, trapped with the drowning men, the desperate, panicked faces as they were pulled under the water, helpless against the sea devil's grasp. I could feel their fear, their struggle, their final moments as they were dragged into the dark, never to be seen again. I could feel their terror, their final breath bubbling in the water, the helplessness and the wrongness of it all. It wasn't just the drowning that haunted me, it was the realization that the sea devil didn't just take lives. It consumed them, not just in body, but in spirit. The souls of those it dragged down never truly escaped. They were lost, trapped in the depths, a part of the creature's eternal hunger. I felt the cold depths closing in around me again, but this time it wasn't just the water. It was the weight of everything, the weight of the souls that the creature had claimed. The fear, the suffering, the loss. I could feel it all pressing down on me, drowning me. I gasped, a sharp, strangled breath that echoed in the silent void, but there was no escape. The more I tried to pull away, the deeper I sank into the vision, the more I became part of it, part of the sea devil's past. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the vision ended. I was back in the water. The creature's grip still held me, but now it was different. Now, I understood. The sea devil wasn't just a predator. It was an ancient force of the ocean, born of the darkness and the rage of the sea itself. It wasn't just feeding on the fishermen, it was feeding on their fear, on their despair, on their very souls. I had become a part of it, a witness to its endless hunger. And in that moment, I knew there was no escaping it. The sea devil was not just something that lived in the depths. It was a force that had always been there, waiting for its next victim. And now, it had found me. There was no way out. No way to escape the depths. The water around me felt like it had become solid, suffocating, each movement sluggish and futile. My limbs were heavy, as though the very ocean was pulling me down, not just with force, but with purpose, an ancient, unyielding desire to consume, to claim. Every kick, every desperate attempt to swim, was met with a tightening grip, the tentacles of the sea devil winding around me like coils of fate, pulling me further into the abyss. I should have been terrified. I should have screamed, fought with everything I had. But I didn't. Fear had transformed into something else, a numb understanding, a resigned awareness that no matter how hard I tried, I could not escape. The creature was so close now. I could feel it with every passing moment. Its cold presence, its unblinking eyes that watched from the depths, waiting for my every move, watching me struggle, almost as if it were enjoying my helplessness. The pressure around me increased, but I no longer felt like I was drowning. I felt like I was being suffocated by the very essence of the ocean itself. Every breath I took was forced, shallow, and fleeting. I tried to push myself upward, my hands cutting through the water in desperate strokes, but the current was relentless, pulling me back. It wasn't just the water, it was the creature, pulling me with an unnatural strength, making the ocean feel like a prison. There was no escape. I tried to think. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe this was all in my head, the result of too many sleepless nights, too much fear, too many stories from fishermen. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't a nightmare. This wasn't a hallucination. The sea devil was real, and I was now part of its story, a story that had been written long before I ever set foot on these cursed shores. The coldness of the water began to seep into my bones, not just physically, but emotionally. It was as if the darkness of the deep ocean had found its way inside of me, twisting my thoughts, erasing my sense of self. The more I struggled, the deeper I sank, not just into the water, but into the despair that surrounded me. The creature's pull was overwhelming. The darkness, its hunger, was all-consuming. And then, as if to confirm what I had feared, the creature's grip tightened again, its tentacles winding around my torso, pulling me closer to the murky depths. My heart raced in panic, but there was no fight left in me. The weight of everything I had seen, everything I had witnessed in the water, in my visions, had drained me. I wasn't just being pulled down physically, I was being dragged into its depths psychologically, too. The creature wasn't just after my life. It was after my very will to live. I thought of the fishermen, the lost souls who had disappeared before me. I thought of their desperate screams, their futile attempts to escape. I thought of the village, the families that would never know what had truly happened to their loved ones. And I realized, with a sickening clarity, that I would never be seen again either. I could feel the depths calling to me, their vastness overwhelming, and the crushing weight of the creature's presence pressing me deeper into the void. There was no escape from it. I was lost, completely, utterly lost. The surface of the water, the world above, was so far away now. The sky, the shore, the village I had once known, all felt like distant memories. I was no longer part of the living world. I was becoming part of something else, something ancient, something that had always existed beneath the waves, waiting to claim more souls. The water closed over my head, and for a moment, everything went black. My lungs burned, my heart hammered in my chest, but the darkness was absolute. It was a calm sort of finality. I had been consumed, both by the creature and the ocean itself. There was no fight left in me now. And then, just before the darkness swallowed me completely, I realized something else. It wasn't just my life that had been taken. The sea devil had claimed my soul, my very essence, like it had claimed countless others before me, dragging them into the depths, where they would never truly be free. There would be no escape from this. No return to the surface. No return to the world I had once known. And with that, I sank into the dark, my body, mind, and spirit lost to the sea devil forever. The coldness of the water felt like ice against my skin, seeping into every crevice of my body. My chest burned as I gasped for air that wasn't there, my lungs begging for relief, yet all I could inhale was the freezing, suffocating salt water. Every muscle in my body screamed for release, but the creature's grip, their unrelenting tentacles, held me in place, pulling me deeper, dragging me away from any semblance of light or hope. I should have been dead by now. The struggle, the panic, should have worn me down completely. Yet I fought on. Something in me refused to give up. Was it instinct? A fleeting hope? Or was it something darker, something primal, the will to survive, even when the odds were insurmountable? I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't die like this. Not without a fight. With every ounce of strength left in me, I twisted and pulled, my hands clawing at the thick, slick tentacle that held my chest in its iron grip. My fingers slipped off the smooth surface, but I kept fighting, desperate to break free. The creature's hold was so strong, but there had to be a way out, there had to be. If I could just break free, if I could reach the surface, I could survive. But the deeper I sank, the more the weight of the ocean pressed against me, like the hand of the abyss itself, pushing me further down, dragging me further from the surface. I could feel the pull of the sea devil's power, an overwhelming force that threatened to consume me, body and soul. The darkness around me seemed to close in tighter, pressing on all sides. The sound of the water, the rhythm of the deep, was deafening, drowning out everything else. Still, I fought. My hands scraped against the tentacle, my heart pounding in my ears, and then I felt it. A weakness, a slight shift in the creature's grip. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me hope. With every ounce of my remaining strength, I pulled harder, twisted my body with a force that felt unnatural. The tentacle shifted again. I was slipping free. The relief was fleeting as another part of the creature's body seized me, this time wrapping around my leg. I screamed, the sound trapped in my throat as I struggled against it. My mind raced. If I didn't break free now, I would never get the chance again. I thrashed, every muscle screaming, but my movements felt slow, heavy, as though the creature was draining my very energy. Yet, somehow, I didn't stop. I couldn't. The vision of the shore, the image of safety, flashed in my mind. I could almost see it, if I could just reach the surface. The tentacle around my leg tightened, and I cried out, pain shooting through me as the pressure intensified. I could feel it pulling me down, pulling me toward the darkness. But I refused to go. I kicked, I punched, I twisted and turned until I felt the creature's grip loosen for the briefest moment. I took advantage of it, reaching out with both hands to tear at the tentacle, my fingers digging into the soft, rubbery flesh. A surge of panic and desperation flooded me. This was my chance. I would break free. I would escape. I kicked again, harder this time, my foot slamming into the creature's limb. The shock of contact sent a tremor through my body, and for just a moment, I felt the creature hesitate. It was enough. I pulled with everything I had, feeling the grip loosen for a second longer than before. With a final, explosive movement, I wrenched myself free from its grasp. I kicked up toward the surface, clawing through the water as fast as I could, my lungs screaming for air. My vision blurred, but I didn't care. The water felt colder now, like the depths were trying to pull me back, to claim me once again. But I could see the faintest glimmer of light above, barely visible but enough to give me hope. I kicked harder, faster. The surface felt within reach, but with every stroke, I felt the creature's presence lurking behind me. The suffocating weight of the water, the ever-present sense of being watched, it was all closing in. The sea devil was not done with me yet. I was still fighting to survive, but I knew deep down that escaping the creature's grasp was never truly a matter of physical strength. It was about my mind, my will to live. And no matter how deep it pulled me, no matter how much fear it instilled in me, I wouldn't let it win. As I surged toward the surface, my body trembling, my mind on fire, a strange clarity washed over me. For the briefest of moments, the panic that had consumed me for so long seemed to dissipate, replaced by a haunting calm. The water around me, the cold pressure of the ocean, the darkness that had been threatening to swallow me whole, they all fell away, leaving only the creature and its terrible truth. I didn't know what it was at first. The water's surface shimmered faintly in the distance, yet it seemed so far away, an unreachable paradise. But in that moment, I saw something else, something that had been right in front of me all along, something I had missed in the rush of survival. The sea devil wasn't just a creature. It wasn't some monstrous, animalistic thing lurking in the deep. No, it was something far older. Something far more terrifying. It was part of the ocean itself. It was the ocean's rage, its hunger, its endless need to consume. It wasn't just a beast that lived beneath the waves. It was the embodiment of everything the sea had ever been, a force of nature, unyielding and eternal. The creature's tentacles were not just appendages, they were conduits to something greater. They were the arms of the ocean, reaching out, pulling at everything in their grasp, suffocating it, drowning it, and leaving only fear in their wake. The sea devil was not a separate entity. It was a part of the sea's eternal hunger, its unquenchable thirst for what it could never have. And now, I understood. It wasn't after me, it was after everything. The sea devil was the ocean's will to claim, to take, to pull everything into its depths. In the flickering light, the surface seemed like an impossible dream, a false hope. The truth of the sea, and the creature that guarded it, was clear now. The sea devil was more than a myth, more than a legend passed down through generations of frightened fishermen. It was a primal force, an ancient power that had no beginning and no end, forever reaching out from the depths to reclaim what was once part of it. A rush of understanding filled me, as if I had unlocked a terrible secret. The creature's presence wasn't about hunger, it was about control. The sea devil wasn't hunting me, it was pulling me back to where I belonged, into the abyss where all things were consumed and forgotten. It wasn't just trying to kill me, it was trying to make me part of it. A victim, yes, but also a piece of the endless, all-encompassing dark that existed beneath the water. I had already been marked the moment I set foot on the shore, the moment I entered its domain. The sudden weight of this revelation almost stopped me in my tracks. For a moment, I lost all sense of direction, my thoughts spiraling in every direction, overwhelmed by the force of the realization. It wasn't just the sea that I had to escape. It was the entire existence of this cursed place, the creature, and the darkness that had always been here. I couldn't fight it. Not really. I could struggle. I could try to swim to the surface. But this thing, this eternal presence, had already claimed me. My body, my mind, my very soul, it was already part of the deep. In that brief moment of clarity, I knew there was no escaping this. The sea devil was the sea, and the sea was never truly free. It had always been here, waiting for those foolish enough to come too close, too curious. And now, it had me. The surface was no longer the salvation I had hoped for. It was just another illusion, a fleeting glimpse of freedom before I would be dragged back into the depths, never to return. The realization was more suffocating than the water pressing against me. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let this be the end. Not like this. With the final remnants of my strength, I surged forward, blindly, desperately, knowing now what I was fighting against. But deep down, I knew the truth I had already lost. The surface was within reach now. The faint, glimmering light from above, the faintest promise of salvation, pulled at me like a lifeline. My body, exhausted and aching, fought to obey, to make those final, desperate strokes toward freedom. But even as I surged upward, I felt it, a shift in the water, a disturbance that was too powerful to ignore. The sea devil was no longer lingering in the depths. It was there, with me. I could feel its presence now, close enough that the very water around me seemed to vibrate with its power. The pull of the ocean, the pull of the creature, was stronger than ever before. It wasn't a mere shadow beneath the waves, it had become a tangible force, a massive, living thing that could bend reality with its very existence. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the truth, there was no escaping it. The sea devil was not just a creature that lived beneath the surface. It was the surface. The sea itself. And now, it had found me. The tentacles broke through the water, swift and silent. I barely had time to react before one of them wrapped around my arm, the slick, rubbery skin constricting like a vice. Panic surged through me as I twisted, trying to free myself, but it was no use. The strength in its grip was unimaginable, crushing my arm with a force that felt like it could snap bone. I gasped, trying to scream, but the cold water filled my mouth. I kicked, my legs thrashing, but the more I struggled, the tighter its grip became. It wasn't just holding me. It was pulling me down, dragging me into the black abyss below. My lungs screamed for air, but I was sinking faster than I could comprehend. The creature's tentacle tightened, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I felt its terrible power flowing through me. It wasn't just physical. There was something else in that touch, something colder, more ancient than the sea itself. It was as if the creature's very essence was seeping into my soul, leaving me paralyzed with fear and a deep, bone-chilling sense of inevitability. In that instant, I saw it. Its massive eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, fixed on me with a predatory gaze that sent a ripple of dread through every fiber of my being. It wasn't the hunger in those eyes that terrified me. It was the knowing. The sea devil wasn't just a predator, it was a guardian. A creature that had witnessed centuries pass by, that had existed long before human eyes had ever seen the shore. And it wasn't interested in killing me. No, it wanted something far worse. It wanted to claim me. A surge of terror shot through my chest as the realization hit. I wasn't just caught in the creature's grasp. I was being pulled into its world, its domain. It was taking me to the depths where no light could reach, where I would be lost forever, never to return to the surface, never to breathe again. But even in the face of this crushing realization, something stirred inside me. A flicker of defiance. A whisper of survival. I wasn't going to let it take me without a fight. With every last ounce of strength, I threw myself against the creature's hold. My arm burned with pain, but I didn't care. I reached up, clawing at the tentacle with my free hand, feeling the slick skin beneath my fingers. I twisted, trying to break free, even as it pulled me deeper, pulling me toward the suffocating darkness. The eyes of the creature gleamed brighter now, a mocking light that filled the water around me. It wasn't in a hurry. It didn't need to rush. It had all the time in the world. My thoughts became a blur, my body a puppet to the force pulling me down. But still, I fought. The fear surged again, mingling with something darker, an understanding that I was no longer just fighting for survival. I was fighting for my very soul, for my place in this world. For the chance to keep what little was left of me. The tension in the water became unbearable, the pressure mounting with every passing second. My chest burned for air, my body weakened by the constant struggle. And yet, even as I felt the cold embrace of the ocean tighten around me, a terrible clarity set in. The sea devil wasn't just taking me. It was changing me. Pulling me deeper into something I couldn't understand, something I was never meant to comprehend. And in that moment, I realized I was already part of it. I was already lost. I let go. Just for a moment. Just to accept it. But that moment was enough. In the space between my surrender and my resolve, I felt it, an opening, a crack in the creature's control. A brief, fleeting chance to escape. With a final, desperate push, I tore my arm free from the tentacle. The surge of freedom, of air rushing back into my lungs, was almost too much to bear. But I didn't stop. I kicked furiously toward the surface, the pain in my body barely registering as I clawed at the water, the terrifying image of the creature's glowing eyes still seared into my mind. I didn't know if I was truly escaping, but I had to try. I was fighting. I had to be fighting. The surface was still within reach, just a few more strokes, a few more desperate gasps of air before I could taste freedom once again. But my body, battered and bruised, felt as if it were moving in slow motion. Every movement, every kick, felt heavier, more futile. My lungs burned, the pressure of the water around me tightening like a vice, suffocating any hope I had left. The distant light from above seemed to flicker, as though it were pulling further away. My mind spun, the world around me a dizzying blur of water, shadows, and an overwhelming sense of dread. I tried to push myself forward, to fight against the pull of the ocean, but my limbs felt numb. Each movement became more sluggish, as though the sea itself was weighing me down, pushing me deeper. The cold was seeping into my bones, and for a fleeting moment, I could swear I heard the creature's voice, or maybe it was just my mind breaking. It was impossible to tell. The momentary clarity I'd had when I fought so fiercely against the tentacle that held me was slipping away like sand through my fingers. I could still feel the weight of the creature's presence, lurking just beyond the veil of the water. The sea wasn't letting me go. The sea devil wasn't letting me go. I didn't know if I was still swimming or if I had simply stopped moving entirely. The water, once my only ally, was now my enemy. The sense of isolation, of being alone in the endless stretch of the ocean, was overwhelming. There was no one out here. No one to save me. No escape. I could still feel the echo of the creature's touch, that icy grip that had marked me, branded me. It wasn't just its physical strength, it was its presence, its influence that had seeped deep into my mind. The creature had touched something inside me, something dark and vulnerable that I didn't even know existed. The fear had turned into something else. Something worse. I began to doubt myself. The doubt crept in slowly at first. Maybe I was imagining all of this. Maybe it wasn't real. Maybe the sea devil was just a myth. But then I thought of its eyes. The way they had gleamed with malice, with knowing. They weren't just eyes, they were watching me. They were waiting for me. I could hear the water swirling around me, the soft whispers of the ocean, as though the sea itself were speaking, telling me that there was no escape. The creature was a part of the ocean. And the ocean was a part of me now. Every stroke toward the surface felt more like an attempt to break free from my own mind than from the creature. The pull of the water seemed to be tugging at something deeper within me, something that wasn't just physical. It was like the sea devil had already taken a piece of me, something intangible but critical, and it was pulling me toward the depths, toward its domain, where I would be just another lost soul swallowed by the sea. I shook my head, trying to clear the thoughts clouding my mind. But they persisted, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. The surface had never felt so far away. The water, the dark ocean, the sea devil, it was all part of something I could never escape. The very essence of the sea had claimed me. It was inescapable. A new wave of fear washed over me, not just the fear of drowning, but the fear of what I would become. The creature's power, its influence, wasn't just physical. It was insidious. It was breaking me from the inside out. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about surrender. The sea had already won. It had already made me part of its world. I stopped fighting. For just a moment, I let myself sink, just a little, letting the pressure of the water embrace me. Maybe it was easier this way. Maybe it was time to let go. The sea devil had been patient and waited for me to reach this point. And now, I was ready to be taken. It had never been about escaping. I had always been a part of it. The pressure around me increased, the water growing colder, the darkness deeper. I was there. I was already lost. The surface was just a memory now, a distant dream. The sea would claim me, and there was no one left to save me. As the last of my strength began to fail, I allowed myself to sink further, knowing that this was the end. The sea devil had won. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Even as I sank deeper, the weight of the sea pulling me further into its grasp, there was a flicker, a small, stubborn spark deep within me that refused to surrender completely. It was the last thread of will, the final shred of defiance that I had left. Something primal and instinctual surged through me. I could still feel the creature's presence, the shadows moving below me, the silent pressure of its power suffocating the water around me. But now, it wasn't just the creature I feared. It was what I was becoming. The sea was changing me. And if I didn't break free, if I didn't fight one last time, I would drown in its darkness forever. I felt the icy grip of the water, the overwhelming cold that seemed to seep into my very soul, but instead of fear, there was something else. It was as if the sea itself was trying to swallow me whole, but I was no longer just a victim. I had been marked by it, yes, but I had also been changed by it. The presence of the sea devil, the weight of its influence, had twisted something inside of me. I could feel it now, something dark, something ancient, stirring within me. The fear had shifted. It wasn't just terror anymore. It was an understanding. The creature didn't just want me to drown. It wanted me to become part of it. And in that moment, I understood. The creature's pull had worked its way into my bones, into my thoughts. It wasn't just seeking to consume me, it was making me like it. The sea, the darkness, the coldness, it wasn't just something to escape anymore. It was a part of me. I was being swallowed, yes, but I was also being reborn. But I couldn't allow it to finish. Not yet. With what little strength remained in my limbs, I pushed against the weight of the water. My movements felt like slow, deliberate actions in a dream, as if the world had slowed down and the sea was trying to claim every moment of it. But there was a determination now, something stronger than the fear, stronger than the influence of the creature. I kicked my legs. I reached for the surface, one stroke at a time, gasping for air that seemed miles away. The pressure around me was unbearable, but my arms and legs moved with a new urgency, pushing against the water as if it were a wall. The sea was trying to keep me down, but now I knew something that I hadn't known before. I had learned the sea's secrets, felt its ancient power. It wasn't just something to fight against anymore, it was something to wield. The creature's eyes flashed through my mind again, those glowing eyes that had haunted me, that had watched me from the depths. But this time, I wasn't just a victim. I understood those eyes. They were full of power, full of an unyielding force. I could feel that power inside me now. It wasn't just the creature's power, it was mine. I was no longer just fighting for survival. I was fighting to hold on to who I was, to maintain my grasp on something human, something real. The sea had tried to take me, tried to drown me in its endless depths, but I had tasted its power, had felt it. And now, I was going to use it. The surface was so close. I could see the faintest glimmer of light breaking through the water, promising escape, promising breath. But the creature was there, lurking beneath, its presence pressing against me like a suffocating fog. It was watching me, waiting for me to give in, to stop resisting. But I wouldn't. Not yet. I took a deep breath and surged forward, my body moving with a strength I hadn't felt before. The pressure of the water tried to drag me back, but I fought it, pushing through the waves with everything I had left. Each stroke felt more powerful, more desperate. The surface was inches away now. I was almost free. But something was different. There was a shift inside me, something subtle, but undeniable. The fear, the doubt, the terror, they had all been replaced. I was no longer just a prey in this fight. The sea was part of me now, its power coursing through my veins. And with that knowledge, I felt a change. I was no longer escaping the sea, I was becoming one with it. I don't remember how I reached the surface. One moment, the world was dark, the cold, crushing pressure of the sea bearing down on me, the depths trying to pull me back. And then, as if the water itself had relented, I broke through. The air was sharp and sweet, filling my lungs with a gasp I didn't think I could make. The surface. I had made it. The stars above were just as I had left them, the night sky stretched out in silent witness to my struggle. But beneath the water, the sea still called to me, its voice whispering through the waves. I lay back on the surface of the boat, gasping, my body trembling. I should have been relieved, grateful. But there was no joy, no sense of triumph. The sea had taken something from me. It had claimed a part of me, and no matter how much air I drew into my lungs, I couldn't fill the hollow space it had left behind. The world felt unreal. The steady rock of the boat beneath me was a comfort, but it wasn't enough to ease the gnawing sensation that something had changed. Something inside me had broken and been rebuilt in the depths of that dark, endless sea. I had faced the sea. Devil, no, become the sea devil, and I had survived. But what did survival mean when you had become part of the thing you feared? I wasn't sure what had happened beneath the water. I didn't know if I had really fought the creature or if I had simply surrendered to it. I didn't know if I had truly escaped or if the ocean had allowed me to leave for a reason. One thing was certain, I could feel it, that connection, stronger than ever. The water was a part of me now. The creature, that terrible, shadowy being, had seeped into my very soul. I looked out over the water, and for the first time, I saw the ocean for what it truly was, an ancient, living thing, with its own will, its own purpose. The sea devil was no myth, no creature of the dark, it was the ocean itself. The deep, uncharted places of the world were alive, and I had learned its secrets. Its hunger. Its power. I could hear the waves crashing against the boat, the rhythm of the ocean. It was calling me again. No longer in fear, but with an invitation. The sea was mine now. It had claimed me and transformed me, and now it was asking me to return. To become part of it once more. The sound of the water didn't scare me. It didn't fill me with dread. It was a song, a lullaby. The creature's eyes, those glowing, unblinking eyes, no longer haunted me. They had become my own. I felt the faintest stir in my chest, an ancient longing, as if the ocean had spoken to me and I had answered. The sea was my legacy now. I wasn't just a survivor. I was its child, the sea devil's heir. The world, from this distance, seemed so small. The boat beneath me, the sky above, it was all so fragile. And I had seen the truth. There was nothing on land that could hold me. Nothing could keep me away from the call of the deep. I wondered how long it would be before I returned. Before I let the ocean claim me completely. Before I embraced the legacy that had been passed down to me in the darkest depths. But for now, I stayed on the surface, trying to shake the feeling that I would never truly be free. That no matter how far I drifted, the sea would always be there, waiting, watching. And I would answer. I would always answer. The sea devil's legacy was mine now. The days that followed felt like a blur. I should have been thankful, should have been grateful for surviving the horrors I'd faced beneath the water. But the reality of what I had experienced, what I had become, gnawed at my mind. The sea, the creature, the cold, unrelenting darkness, they haunted me, even in daylight. No matter how far I traveled from the water, it always felt as if the ocean was still pressing against me, its vastness looming just out of sight. I couldn't shake the sensation of the deep water pulling at me, a heavy weight pressing on my chest, suffocating me with its icy fingers. Every night, I lay awake, unable to sleep, my mind replaying the events beneath the waves. The images of those glowing eyes that had seen into me, that had consumed me, flashed in my mind over and over. I could hear the sound of the water, the way it had rushed around me, so thick, so unyielding. It was as though the sea itself had whispered my name and pulled me into its grasp. There were moments when I thought I was losing my mind. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, gasping for breath as if I were still underwater. My heart would pound in my chest, my body trembling with the aftershocks of the terror I had felt. I could hear the waves crashing against the shore, a sound that once soothed me, now made my stomach twist into knots. The darkness of the ocean was always with me, a reminder of what I had faced and what I had become. I couldn't even look at the water without feeling nauseous. I would stand at the edge of the shore, staring out at the horizon, watching the waves as they rolled in. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also wrong. There was something lurking beneath it, something alive and waiting. I could almost feel the creature's eyes on me, even when I wasn't near the water. It was like a phantom touch, the ghost of the creature brushing against my skin, sending a cold shiver down my spine. I tried to talk to people about it, local fishermen, the ones who had warned me. But they didn't understand. No one did. They would nod in that way people do when they don't really believe you, when they don't want to hear the things you've seen, the things you've felt. The terror that had ripped through me was beyond anything they could imagine. They had heard the legends, yes, but they hadn't seen. They hadn't felt what I had felt, the weight of the sea in their bones, the way it had wrapped itself around my mind like a disease. I began to pull away from everyone. I couldn't stand to be around anyone who hadn't been to that place, who hadn't experienced the call of the ocean. The more I tried to explain, the more I realized there was no way to describe what had happened to me. No way to make them understand. And so I withdrew into myself, into the silence of my own mind. But the silence was worse. Because in the silence, the ocean spoke louder. It wasn't just the nightmares anymore. The dreams of glowing eyes and endless darkness had begun to leak into my waking hours. I'd hear the sound of water rushing in my ears, as if I were still submerged. The sensation of the creature's shadow moving beneath me, its cold touch creeping up my spine, lingered in the back of my mind. It was like a curse I couldn't escape. A part of me was still down there, still in the depths, still intertwined with the sea devil. Every breath I took felt like it was filled with salt and seaweed. Every glance at the ocean felt like an invitation to return. I could feel it calling to me, always pulling, always waiting. There were moments when I wondered if I had truly survived, or if I had simply become part of the sea, part of the thing that lurked beneath the waves. And as much as I hated myself for it, there was a part of me that wanted to go back. To dive deep into the water again and let the creature claim me once more. But I couldn't. I knew that now. I knew that whatever had happened to me, whatever I had become, I couldn't go back. The sea was no longer just the sea. It was part of me, as much a part of me as my own heartbeat. It was my legacy, my curse. And every time I looked at the water, I knew it was waiting for me. I was afraid of what I might do next. Afraid of what I had become. The visions began slowly, creeping in like the tide. At first, I thought they were just nightmares, fragments of the terror I'd endured beneath the surface. But the longer I tried to shake them off, the stronger they became, as if the creature was unwilling to let me go. The water, once so calming, now had a grip on my mind, pulling me deeper and deeper into its grasp, even while I was miles away from the ocean. It started with a sound. I'd be walking through town, surrounded by people, and suddenly, I'd hear it, the distant rush of water, like a storm building in the distance. I'd freeze, my heart hammering in my chest, as if the ocean itself had opened up just beyond the horizon. The sound would grow louder, closer, until it seemed as though the waves were crashing right on top of me. The air would grow heavy, thick with salt, and I could almost taste it on the back of my throat. When I turned to look, there was nothing. Just the quiet, mundane world around me. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The weight of the water was still there, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe, as if the sea itself was watching. Waiting. The visions came next. They were subtle at first, flashes of the creature's glowing eyes, peering up from beneath the waves, glowing like lanterns in the dark. At night, while I lay in bed, I'd close my eyes and see them again, piercing through the darkness. I could feel them following me, tracing my every movement, as if they could see inside me, see what I had become. But then the visions started to change. The eyes weren't just eyes anymore. They became shapes, distorted and terrible, shifting in the shadows. Tentacles wrapped around the edges of my vision, stretching out from the dark like long, cold fingers, their movements slow, deliberate, like the creature was reaching for me. The water, always the water, rose higher in the vision until it filled my entire mind, drowning out everything else. I'd wake up gasping for air, my hands gripping the edge of the bed, my chest tight with the panic that followed. And sometimes, just when I thought the visions had subsided, I'd catch glimpses of them even in the daylight. I'd look into a reflective surface, a mirror, a window, and for a moment, I would see it. The water. The creature. The shadow lurking just beneath the surface of the world. It was as if the very air was infused with the ocean, as if the sea had seeped into everything I saw. The image would flicker and vanish, but the cold, dark feeling would stay. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, a product of the trauma. But deep down, I knew that whatever the creature was, it hadn't let go of me. It was still there, in the corners of my mind, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Then came the dreams. They weren't like the ones I had before, dark and twisted, yes, but these were different. In them, I was underwater again. I was no longer struggling against the currents, no longer fighting to survive. I was simply there, floating in the depths. The water was thick and cold, pressing against me from all sides. I could feel the weight of it, the pressure, as if the ocean was alive, breathing with me. I'd see the creature in the distance, its massive, glowing eyes staring at me through the murk. But it didn't move. It just watched. I would swim toward it, as if drawn by some invisible force, and with every stroke, the water grew colder, darker. The creature's tentacles would rise from the depths, twisting around me like chains, pulling me closer, but I couldn't resist. I could feel myself sinking, becoming part of the water, becoming part of it. The visions didn't stop there. They began to bleed into my waking hours. I'd be walking down the street, lost in thought, when I'd feel a sudden chill, as if the ocean was closing in on me. I'd look over my shoulder and see it, just for a moment, there in the distance. A ripple on the surface of the water. A flicker of movement in the Sea Devil of Cape Cod. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet waters of Cape Cod. I stood on the dock, feeling the familiar creak of the wood beneath my boots, the scent of salt in the air. It was a place I had come to know well over the years, a place of peace in its own strange way. But tonight, something felt different. The breeze carried a cold edge, and the vast expanse of the water seemed endless, unyielding. Cape Cod had always been isolated, cut off from the rest of the world by miles of rugged shoreline. People came here for solitude, or maybe to escape the chaos of their lives, but I had come for a different reason: the sea. It was in my blood. My grandfather had been a fisherman, and I had followed in his footsteps, though I wasn't sure I was cut out for it. Still, there was something captivating about the water. Something that always drew me back. The houses along the coast were old, their weathered wood and rusted nails telling stories of years past. I was used to the sight, the sagging roofs, the peeling paint, but tonight, the familiar landscape looked different. Darker, almost like it was hiding something, as though the world had shifted just enough for me to notice. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though no one was around. The place was deserted, save for a few old fishermen lingering in the distance, their figures barely visible against the twilight sky. I knew the stories they whispered. Some of them spoke of things in the water, things that lived beneath the surface, hidden from sight. Tales of disappearances, of boats found empty, of fishermen vanishing without a trace. At first, I thought they were just rumors, local superstitions meant to keep the younger generation away from the water at night. But something tonight told me that there was more to those stories. A shiver ran down my spine as I glanced toward the darkening water. The waves were calm, almost unnaturally so, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. I pushed the uneasy feeling aside. I was here to fish, not to be haunted by old stories. But even as I turned toward my boat, the air seemed to grow colder, and the stillness around me felt heavier. It was as if the quiet itself was waiting for something. I couldn't explain it, but I knew that tonight, the sea would not be kind. I didn't know what I was expecting when I set out onto the water that evening, but it certainly wasn't the uneasy quiet that settled over me as I cast off. The boat glided slowly, the motor humming softly, but everything around me was still. The waves were barely more than a ripple, and the sky stretched endlessly above, painted with the soft hues of twilight. But there was a sharpness to the air now, something colder than it should have been for such a mild evening. As I drifted further from shore, the last vestiges of sunlight disappeared beneath the horizon, and the world seemed to shrink, becoming a tunnel of dark water and shadow. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders, a reflex to ward off the chill creeping through the air, though I couldn't quite shake the growing sense that I wasn't alone. The stories about the sea devil floated in the back of my mind, whispers from the old fishermen, but I laughed them off. My grandfather had always called them nonsense. "There's no monster in the sea," he'd say, "only fish, and the wind, and the endless stretch of water." Still, something felt off tonight. I cast my line into the water, the line cutting through the stillness with a soft plop. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating, and for a moment I considered turning back. But I dismissed it, blaming my unease on the isolation. The sound of the waves, the hum of the engine, it was all too familiar. There was nothing here to be afraid of. Then I saw it. At first, it was nothing more than a glimmer in the deep. Just the faintest reflection, something that shimmered beneath the surface. I leaned forward, squinting into the dark water, trying to make sense of it. My breath caught in my throat as I saw them, two faint, glowing orbs, barely visible at first, but slowly coming into focus. Eyes. Eyes that shone with an eerie, unnatural light. I froze. The eyes were just beneath the surface, too far to touch, but close enough to make my skin crawl. They weren't the eyes of any animal I recognized. They were large, too large, and they shimmered with an unearthly glow. I could feel the blood draining from my face, my heart thudding in my chest. My first instinct was to pull the line back, to retreat, but something held me there. The eyes didn't blink. They just stared, unblinking, as if they were waiting, watching, studying me. A strange, cold sensation washed over me, a gut-deep feeling of being haunted. But what haunted me? And why? The wind shifted, the air growing thicker, colder, and the eyes seemed to shift, moving ever so slightly beneath the water's surface, as if drawn closer to my boat. My breath caught again as the boat rocked slightly. No, not from the waves. It was something else. Something beneath me. I jerked my head around, expecting to see something in the water, some kind of massive shape, but there was nothing. Just the water, dark and still, stretching to the edge of the horizon. I couldn't look away from the eyes, though. They didn't move, but their glow grew stronger, as though they were pulling me in. I wanted to turn the boat around, to flee back to shore, but my body was frozen, gripped by an overwhelming sense of dread. What if I did? What would happen? The eyes blinked. It was so sudden, so unexpected, that I almost fell into the water. But before I could even gather my wits, the glow of those eyes dimmed, slipping back into the depths like a ghost retreating into the shadows. I waited for a moment, holding my breath, expecting them to return, but the water was still again. Too still. I wasn't sure if what I had just seen was real. Could it have been a trick of the light, some weird reflection off the water? But deep down, I knew better. I had seen them, those eyes. And they had seen me. My hands were trembling as I pulled the line back in, the knot in my stomach tightening. I should have turned around then. I should have gone back to shore. But something, a mix of fear and curiosity, kept me there, anchored in the darkness. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just the isolation getting to me. The ocean played tricks on people, didn't it? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had watched me from below wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was something real. Something waiting. The next morning, the air was thick with fog, the kind that clung to your skin and muffled the world around you. I stood at the dock, my hands wrapped around the warm rail as I watched the mist swirl over the water. It was a quiet morning, the kind that made you feel like the world had been swallowed up by the sea. And in that stillness, the unease from the night before settled deeper into my bones. I couldn't shake the image of those glowing eyes, their cold gaze etched into my mind like a brand. I wasn't alone at the dock. A group of the old fishermen were gathered in their usual spot, talking in low voices. They didn't notice me at first, and I didn't approach them immediately. I knew better than to interrupt their mornings. They weren't the friendliest sort, especially when they were busy preparing their boats. But as I watched, I caught snippets of their conversation. It was the usual talk of tides, catches, and bad weather. But then something changed. A pause in their words, a shift in the air. The topic turned to the water, to the deep sea. "You've been out there lately?" one of the men, a weathered old fisherman with a long, gray beard, asked another. His voice was low, cautious. The second man, a bit younger but still with the sea in his eyes, looked out at the fog with a furrowed brow. "I been out yesterday. Same as always, but there's something different out there now." The first man grunted, his eyes narrowing. "Something in the depths. Not like the sharks or the cod. This thing, it's been coming closer." A shiver ran down my spine, and I took a cautious step closer. I didn't want them to notice me, but I couldn't help but listen. They were talking about something I hadn't heard before, something darker than the usual sea creatures that haunted the waters around Cape Cod. "What do you mean, something different?" the younger man asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. The older man's face tightened, his gaze moving from the water to the others around him. This has been a long, dark journey through the night with Whisper Crowley. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Leave a like if these stories made you look at the darkness a little differently, and share in the comments what you enjoyed most or what gave you chills. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next Sinister Whispers. Until we meet again in the world of shadows.